Hello and welcome everyone to our third and final day of the fourth annual Designing for Empathy Virtual Summit. We are delighted to have you join us, friends old and new, folks from all around the world. My name is Greg Stevens and I am pleased to be your moderator for today's program. And in a moment, I will introduce Elif Gokcigdem, our fearless leader who has made all of this happen. Just a quick reminder that we are recording this program to be available to all of you at a later date. And we have closed captioning transcripts available to you as well. Before I turn the stage over to Elif, I do want to offer two land acknowledgements. I am calling you from New York City, which is the traditional homeland of the Lenape nations, and we honor and respect their stewardship of these lands. And Elif, I know that you are in Washington, D.C., which is the traditional homelands of the Anacostan people, and that Washington, D.C. borders on the traditional lands of the Petoskey and Pamunkey people. So we honor collectively these and other indigenous peoples around the world. With that said, it is my great pleasure to welcome you and to welcome Elif. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Greg, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. And if you're coming just for today for the first time, welcome. We are so glad that you are here. And I'm going to keep my remarks very short because I have been doing these introductory sort of context providing remarks every day, but today is the last day. Those who are just watching today, when this is recorded, please refer to the other 2 days remarks to learn more about the initiative Designing for Empathy framework and One organization of networks for empathy. With that, I would like to welcome you all again. And next slide, please. And I would like to acknowledge all of our sponsors, Threshold Society, Glencairn Museum, Museum of Us, the Phillips Collection, Seattle Aquarium, Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, Woodland Park Zoo, Culture Connect, and the George Washington University Museum and the Textile Museum. Next slide, please. And also all the individual supporters who were so generous with their time and ideas and support in many ways. Starting with Tom Rockwell and Mary Hall Surface, Fatih Durmush, Dr. Zorhana Ivsevich Pringle, Michelle Cedars, Dr. Catherine Kristen, Makiba Clay, Dr. John Wettenhall, Susan Norton, Alexandra Shireen, Cinnamon Kathleen Lagutko, Christine McDonald, Dean Faylis, Safia Darshade, Elena San, and of course, Greg Stevens. Thank you for being here again. And next slide, please. Just to reiterate, Designing for Empathy is a platform for a diverse group of individuals from different backgrounds, different disciplines, different sectors to come together and create experiential learning opportunities to solve the empathy deficit problem. Next slide, please. So today we're going to start our program with a short performance by Andrew Nemr. He's a tap dance artist and teacher joining us from New York, I believe. And then because he spoke yesterday at the panel on alchemy of empathy, so this is our chance to actually feel what he was trying to express in words the other day. Then we have a group of individuals with unique perspectives on empathy building and creating those spaces for empathy building. So I'm hoping that their collective contributions will help us get inspired and learn about the different ways of doing increasing empathy. Next slide, please. And then after that, we have this group of panel that's mostly from the zoos and aquariums. And they're going to talk about how to start collective action for building empathy. And of course, just as a reminder, next slide, please. This is the end of the summit, but our workshops still continue. So tomorrow we have Edwin Rush's empathy circles. You can just join in through the Zoom link that's on the illustration, which you should have received. But if you can also sign up to let us know, so we can know how many people will be there, that would be helpful too. So you have two options to do that. But the Zoom link that should be used is the one on this visual, which you have also received as part of your welcoming packages. We are not there yet, Greg. Thank you. And then we have, of course, our wonderful friends from the Empathic Intervision, Lidaway Neesing and Catherine Train will join us and lead us on an empathy building workshop on using imaginative empathy to unpack climate change. Thank you. And with that, I would like to welcome, oh yeah, hands up. Actually, Lidaway just reminded me, Greg, if you don't mind, so you probably know this, but if you're just joining today, we have been doing this crazy thing every morning. We raise our hands up to say hello to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, because he suggested that he has only two hands, he can do so much, but if we join and get hands that get on the hands-on working on fostering empathy and compassion, we are more powerful. So and today we have some new faces with us. If you just don't mind doing that again for us, so we can capture the screen capture of all the faces here in like maybe two different screens.
And let me just get
more
one more. Excellent. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Such beautiful faces.
Thank you. And of course, we'll share these photos with all of you after the event. So with that, I would like to pass the floor to Andrew.
Thank you, Elif. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. As you mentioned, I'm going to dance for everyone today. Before I begin, I just want to share the three things that I found in tap dance land that I've used continually in teaching and performance environments to reshape the way dancers relate to one another and their audience and their practice. These are common context, the idea that there is something that is of similar nature that we can connect with one another. Focused listening, the idea that we can direct our listening to the far reaches of a situation in order to hear differently and to hear more, and the idea of communal imagination. This in tap dance land, it's centered around the idea of time and the organization of time, but this idea that the thing that actually mediates our relationships might be something that we envision together, and that's a very important element in terms of the way that we relate to one another. So I've been a tap dancer for 37 years. Much of my training and my experience has been in the context of oral tradition under the apprenticeship of recognized masters in the field. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit of what that looks like.
Andrew, the sound is very little.
Oh, hard to hear?
Yes, is that what some other people are feeling? Just really, yeah.
How's this?
Let's see. Yes, thank you.
No problem. Thank you for letting me know. if we have time, I'd like to offer the opportunity for all of us to try to tap dance.
Yes.
Okay,
Go ahead.
let's do this. So there's one pattern in the world of tap dance land that is considered the fundamental thing. Like, if you learn this, you will have everything that you need to know about tap dancing. And this is what we're going to try and learn. So, if you're interested, willing, please stand up. You can also do this seated. It's just more fun standing. So, it's 4 movements. The first one is called a dig. We take whichever leg you like, probably your dominant one, and strike the floor with the back of your heel. Do this a couple times. Just get used to the movement. You're going to be fighting all kinds of physical memory if this is something that is not common for your body to do. So this is the dig. This is the first movement. And we're going to leave it on the ground. For the second movement, we're going to execute a brush. The front of your foot, the front of the bottom of your foot, is going to strike the floor on the way up. So we have the dig, and then we have the brush. Do this a couple times. Again, if your body's not used to these movements, it's going to take a second for it to feel even viable. And the brush is going to end up in the air. So we have the dig, and we have the brush. And we leave it in the air. On our way down, for the third and the fourth movements, we have a step. It's just the front of the foot. The back of the foot stays up. And then for the fourth movement, we drop the heel. So number 3 is a step, and number 4 is the heel. The bottom of the tap shoe has 2 metal plates, one on the back, one on the front. So much of the craft work is an articulation of the front and the back of the foot and just separating those things. So our 4 movements are a dig, a brush, a step, and a heel drop. We'll do it a couple times. A dig, a brush, a step, and a heel drop. Once again, dig, and a brush, a step, and a heel drop. Last time, a dig, and a brush, a step, and a heel drop. Now, together, that pattern is called the paddle and roll. Leslie Bubba Gaines, a recognized master in the world of tap dance land, considered that pattern to hold all the technique that you would need to know in the world of tap dance. And if we were to take this pattern and play it foot to foot, and maybe speed up the tempo a little bit, we can play. Dig, brush, step, heel.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
That was so much fun, and woke me up, and also reminded me of my college tap dance classes, where the only thing I remember is the time step, which I can still do. I can still do a time step.
We should
Very
have a
cool.
workshop in just communications in tap for people who have never tried it. But let's stop using the words, the hearing. The hearing will come, but let's stop talking and hear each other in a different way. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And this was wonderful. And next up, we will have very short presentations, like 5 to 7 minutes each person, and then so that we have some time to talk about the issues all together. Next up, I think we have Juiko Kanyoka from Play Africa. I don't know if she's here. I don't see her here. So maybe we'll move to Michelle. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I missed Kevin. Kevin was next up. Sorry. I changed my seeing position and just messed up everything. So, okay, Kevin, please go ahead. And then Michelle.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in your part of the world. I thank you for joining us in community, and thank you for putting this together. Andrew, that was just absolutely incredible. What a wonderful way to start a day and a weekend. Oh my goodness, the new perspectives, the music, I was just rocking it, and I learned so much. I heard trains. I'm taking some of my time just to share love for you, because that was just absolutely incredible. Everyone, I am Kevin. My pronouns are he, him. I'm based in Seattle, and where I live at the intersection of various identities. I'm an immigrant, I'm a gay man, I live with an invisible disability, I'm a brown person, atheist, and various other intersectional identities that make who I am. And why I share that is because I'm going to share my story and how Jaago came about and how we can work to build empathy and make it a daily habit. Over the last 2 days, I unfortunately wasn't able to attend all the sessions, but my husband, who's been able to attend all of them, did fill me in on all the things that's been going on and shared the amazing conversations that are happening. And one of the key takeaways was people asking, now, how do we put it into practice? How do we make empathy something that is not just a conversation, but an action and a habit and a behavior change? And that's what I want to talk about today. I've been working in tech my entire career. I got my computer and electrical engineering degree, and then I started putting internet and TV on planes. So when you fly and you see those screens or you're connecting to the internet, I was one of the people that made that happen. And then I moved into Seattle, and that was in Florida, and we moved to Seattle with our lovely dog, and I joined a company where I built tech for police, for law enforcement, building body cameras, taser software, services for police with the mission of protecting life and driving accountability and truth. And I put 100%, 200% of myself in. I went all in, believing in that. And I traveled the world, went on ride-alongs in police cars, and really just tried to build technology and use my superpowers to help with that mission. During all of my career, during that period, my personal superpower was empathy. As a people manager, as a product manager, as a people leader, I found that empathy was the way that I set myself apart and differentiated myself from all of that, all of the others. When 2020 came about, I was all excited, I was optimistic, went all in. And then the punctuation that hit me and hit the world, I think, was George Floyd's murder. George Floyd's murder led to a couple of things that asked me to pause. First was my company's stock hit an all-time high the next trading day after the murder. And a small group of people became wealthier off of someone's unrelated murder. That didn't sit well with me. Then the police told me that they used the products that I had built with positive intent against the Black Lives Matter protesters. And it worked so well that it broke their spirit, and they didn't come to protest the next day. And as a product leader, building a team, building these products, it broke me. I had a special compensation contract with a company worth $15 million. And I realized I was on the wrong side. I was becoming wealthier off of the conflict, not changing the conflict. Every time the conflict occurred, I was being rewarded. And the small group of people, mostly straight, white, cis men, were rewarded. And so I asked myself, what do I do? And so in June of 2020, without a job, without a plan. I resigned. I gave up the entire compensation package. And I asked myself, how do we solve these problems that are happening in our communities? How do we get past yelling at each other, talking past each other, and start listening to each other? And how do we approach and create a way where all the companies that talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, those are goals. How do we achieve them? What is the way to achieve them? Because I did research and none of the existing ways were working. You can't just do a workshop once a year and expect that to work. We know studies have said that after 2 days that expires. So what is it? And to me, the answer was simple and it was loud. It was empathy. Empathy is the way, in my opinion, that can achieve the goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion and build that community and reverse the empathy deficit that we are in. And then I looked around and asked myself, how do we do that? And I couldn't find a solution that fit within people's lives without being disruptive and trying to help create those habits. And so for me, that's what started Jaago. Jaago means to wake up in Hindi. And I started that mission to build the world's first and only empathy gym, mobile app and program that helps create empathy and make it a daily habit by spending 3 minutes a day and really doing that. And that's because to me, I wanted us to create a way where we can scale and build empathy. So I'm going to go ahead and share a couple of slides as I talk through this. So it says my screen sharing is paused. Hold on. Shares. Let's see. All right. I think you should be able to see the screen now. So it is an app that is live right now. And the idea was, how do we create a way where we don't include bias and everyone's story matters and voices matters and people feel seen and heard. And so what we did is we built a place where you first learn about your intersectional identity. And that is why I shared my intersectional identity early on. Knowing ourselves, knowing what our lived experience has been, our cultural lens, our experience that shaped our worldview is an important aspect of practicing empathy. That is the first thing you do when you join the gym. Just like you would hire a personal trainer, you can't expect to work out once a year and expect results. You would need to do it every day. And just like this app and our program that we offer does that. So the way it works is you come in, we have a storyteller experience, we have an explorer experience, and then we have an intersectional identity. The app is live right now and it's free for all consumers, for anyone in the world to download it on the Google Play and Apple App Store and check it out. So first thing you do is you sign up, create a profile, you learn about your intersectional identity. And then when you do that, the parts that are most important is asking those questions. And those intersectional identities grow. And over time, we will add more and remind you that here, your worldview changes and experience increase. After that, we create a personalized learning experience for each person based on their intersectional identity. So give them the most impact of that growth. And we pair them with user submitted stories. So we have 700 stories in our public library of 3 minutes or less that people all over the world have shared. And you can share too. You can add your own story. And those stories are added when you upload, when those stories come up, you get to watch that story and that's it. It's not something like Netflix where you choose or like YouTube where you browse. We offer you the first story to watch and then help you watch and grow in an order based on the story and matching with your growth journey. You watch the story, so you learn deep listening, and then you answer 6 questions. The first question is, how did you feel after you watched that story? A moment to reflect. Second, how do you think the storyteller felt when they were telling the story? And then you answer from a multiple choice. And once you answer, you are immediately told whether you matched with what the storyteller said. So when you upload the story, the storytellers ask the same questions. So we match whether you said it. And so now you have immediate feedback whether your perspective was matching with what the storyteller felt. And so now it helps start shaping that mindset of empathy. The next question is, what do you think the storyteller felt when they were living that story? And so you put yourself in their perspective and you live that story and then you answer the question and then you get to see whether you match with what the storyteller said. Then you're asked a couple more questions, like, would you recommend this story to others? As well as, would you like to thank the storyteller for their courage? recognizing that sharing your story is an act of courage. It is an act of vulnerability, but it is a courageous, brave act. And we need to do that, and we need to recognize it. There is no comments. This is not a social media network. This isn't a platform where you talk to others. This is your own personal space, which is a safe space to learn and grow. And so this is where you can see you get scores. So it's a measured approach. When you upload the story, you can name your story, you add different categories to it. You have your own scores that you get based on the responses you get. So it's a little bit gamified, so you can start tracking your progress as well. And then all we say is 3 minutes a day, watch one story a day and upload one of your stories a week. The reason we ask you to upload is when you share your story, it does help build empathy. Sharing your story empowers yourself. It helps you understand your own biases, your own cultural lens. So when you listen to someone else, you can understand and separate your own story from others. And finally, I wanted to just stop share. Coming back to the space, we also have this available for organizations. So our sort of the way we approach this to help drive revenue is we offer it to companies so that the companies can offer it to their employees, and their companies have their own private library, so they can share stories that are contextual within the companies, build a stronger culture, and see the people behind the titles and remove that hierarchical structure that are present. We pair this with our empathy workshops. So we kick off with an empathy 101. Then we have every month, we do an empathy stretch. So it's this workshop where people come in and sort of touch base in a cohort-based analysis. And then we also have other workshops that we paired around LGBTQ folks, and then anti-racism workshops that come in. And this is not a once and done program. This is a year-long, continuous, lifelong journey that we put people through. And with that, I appreciate the time, appreciate the opportunity and the space and the community. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being empathetic.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing your story and helping us understand, the thinking behind the Jaago app and how we each can use it, and we'll hopefully we'll get a little bit more time to talk about it. And I can think of so many applications, as you can imagine, that for doctors, for teachers, for politicians, and
Yeah. And Elif, I just forgot one thing I wanted to say is I believe that we've all asked like what superpower you would have, right? And when we say, people say, I want to teleport, I want mind control, I want fly. But I believe empathy is a superpower that exists in our world and is a reality. And we all can learn and become superheroes by learning that superpower. And that's why I call myself Captain Empathy, to inspire people to become superheroes themselves.
Awesome.
And I completely agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And I understand actually. Maybe we should have. I think Jaago is here. Is that right, Greg?
Correct.
Should we, Michelle, is that okay? Okay, so we'll invite Jaago Kanyoka from Play Africa.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about earlier. I'm not sure why I was not visible on the list. But I was actually in the meeting, but it's okay.
Oh, sorry.
No problem.
So thank you so much for joining us. We would love to hear your perspective on, how you incorporate, and the detailed descriptions are in the program. So I'm not going to talk, and I'll just let you start introducing yourself and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen. I hope it's visible now.
Yes, it is.
I am Jaago Kanyoka, and I am a program manager and placemaking lead at Play Africa in Johannesburg. Play Africa is Southern Africa's pioneering children's museum, creating shared, inclusive, and equitable spaces for children's play and learning. We're also an education makerspace, a research and development engine of scalable innovations. We transform existing public spaces for playful learning to empower children, inspire parents and teachers, and build social cohesion in a divided society. In the last 4 years, we've turned public spaces into playful learning spaces for 35,000 kids, parents, and teachers. We have reached hundreds of thousands more with scalable programs. We reach children where they are and offer free access in partnership with more than 245 schools and NGOs in marginalized communities. Our approach to community partnerships makes us one of the most inclusive children's museums in the world. By transforming public spaces to better serve children, their play and their learning, we're disrupting the very idea of what a museum can be. This work by Play Africa is motivated by various factors, including UNICEF studies that show that only 29% of children in South Africa have access to safe play areas. Through the work and learnings I have had with Play Africa and my background training as an architect, I have gotten the opportunity to deepen my understanding of architecture as an empathic field at its core, though rarely consciously practiced as such. The professional world and that of academia has masked this through placing meeting a need at the forefront of the field's purpose, to such a point that the value of intentionality in other aspects that make good architecture often gets lost. While it is of paramount importance that architecture meets needs such as shelter, healing, work, learning, and so forth, we cannot ignore that a sizable opportunity to enhance architecture is missed when we fixate on architecture only as a product to meet a need. The architectural process is just as important, and I believe an empathic approach that especially remembers those who are often excluded makes this more eminent. It is through empathy that a creator or artist can deeply understand and capture another's experience. How do we effectively design or bring creations into the world for another when we're not committed to delving into how they perceive the world and how they experience the world? As architects, we have a unique duty in shaping the world around us, and it would greatly enhance how we do so if we cultivated a deep empathic understanding of how what we are bringing into the world situates itself with all that currently exists. How does this newness situate itself within the past, with the past, the present, and the future? Architecture, or any creation for that matter, simply does not come into existence in isolation. By merely adding newness to the world, we disrupt the world. I would hope then that our intentions with these disruptions include healing and repairing. To fully birth an expression of this nature, we have to be willing to view and process the world in an empathic manner. Empathic approaches to designing, when implemented, often encompass studying users and the world around us through observation only. Through my most formative years and at Play Africa, I have come to learn of deep empathic architectural practices, such as placemaking, a process that meets users where they are, directly engaging and co-creating with them to understand their thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and ideas as a means to innovating for their needs and the social challenges that they face. At Play Africa, we use design thinking to engage children in placemaking, with our approach being enabled by our image of the child as full and complete citizens able to solve problems with creativity and fresh insights. Through a re-situated architectural practice, such as placemaking with children, I have observed how designing for empathy empowers children to fully embody their roles in society as change makers. Empathy building is a natural feature in all of Play Africa's programs, and in placemaking, it enables children to reclaim public spaces for and with children. Their creative and innovative prowess is nurtured, and they get to claim their capabilities to influence, ask questions, and stand up for their right to the city. With such a great need for more playful African cities and a large population of children that are neglected in development agendas, Play Africa has created an open source, virtually accessible toolkit, which offers anyone who cares about ensuring cities and communities serve children an approach to placemaking with and for children. The toolkit makes use of a customized design thinking curriculum that emphasizes empathy between facilitators and children, and between participating children and other children in their communities. Through open dialogue, mutual respect, and a mutual need to understand the other parties, the empathic approach opens up a highway of understanding that has led me to understand and believe that there is a resituated architectural practice that children may be able to be a part of and can be greatly transformative to the world as we know it in a positive way. It is not only empathic, and it is not only through empathic approaches or placemaking or co-creative processes, but it is through engaging children directly that we can transform the world. Due to this belief, Play Africa is launching a new program which will ensure thousands of children experience this workshop with the aim to increase accessibility of play to all children and increase empathy building. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rico, for this wonderful overview of your work and how you see empathy fitting in your work, and how the ways you found designing for empathy important. At this time, I would like to move on to the next friend who will share her perspectives on building a first children's museum in Saudi Arabia. Michelle?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Michelle, and I use the pronouns she and her. I'm currently located in Northern California, very close to Sacramento, working for a company that does vision care. But about 15 years ago-ish, something around that, I was a part of a project to help build a large, multifaceted, multi-component cultural center in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. And it was a part of this project where I met Elif for the first time. And we became very good friends after that. And very quickly, as we were developing the scope and the desired vision and impact of this larger cultural center, we honed in on the tremendous need within that community and for greater empathy. And we didn't call it empathy at that time. It was more just an amalgamation of thoughts and feelings about, what the society and what the community over there was sort of missing, and inspired by experiences as the director of a history museum for 10 years prior to that, and seeing how especially young people would interact, and mostly young Saudi nationals would interact with anyone who wasn't Saudi in that community. It lit this fire in me to try to help to address what is actually systemic racism over there, and discrimination, and a pretty much a societally supported caste system, segregation of not just the genders, the male and female, but anybody who wasn't who didn't fit into the Saudi national profile. And there's a lot of different individuals from all over the world over there that are working in very different capacities. And there's this perception that anyone who isn't, Saudi is a lesser being. And you see that in how the children treat the individuals that are in the service industry, or anyone pretty much that is not exactly like them. And it just kills me. But so what we did as a part of this larger cultural center, it has a library. It has, it's been running now for a few years. It has a library and a bunch of museums and all that sort of stuff. But what they had wanted to do was to create children's spaces within each one of those larger adult spaces. So in the library, there's a children's section, or was going to be a children's section. In the history museum, there's going to be a children's section, and they were going to be scattered all over this larger facility. And having seen a number of children's museums in the United States and in Europe, I proposed the idea to, why don't we build a space that entirely belongs to the children, to the youth? so that when they come to this, beautiful, wonderful facility, which you can kind of see a picture in the background, which is my background at the moment, that they actually feel like they belong, that they aren't just a tag along in an adult space, but they have actual, children, space that is theirs. And a part of the development of this, the scope and the vision for this space, once we got it approved, or in the process of getting it approved, was to actually address in a very subtle way some of this discriminatory perceptions, some of these races, that systemic racism that is in the society, realizing that it would take probably generations for it to slowly work its way, towards a more positive.
Hello, is this Charles from Play Africa?
Yes.
This is Rico. I just spoke to Gretchen and she mentioned that you're...
Rico, I'm sorry, you're on audio.
Oh, she's just muted again. Sorry,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
I think there was a
Oh.
mix-up.
I wasn't sure if it was a question.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah.
Oh, no
Okay.
worries.
But yeah.
So basically, and Elif and I worked really closely on building this. And one of the biggest challenges we faced in trying to, for all intents and purposes, change society or provide an igniting element that would help to, be a catalyst towards future change over generations, was that there are a lot of very strong beliefs, a lot of very, rigid, boundaries as far as what people's comfort levels are and what's socially acceptable, what's religiously acceptable, and all that sort of stuff. And so when we were creating the exhibits and the programs and in the philosophy for this new facility, we did it in a very subconscious, like kind of almost guerrilla tactic way. And one example of this, or a couple of examples, are things like music. Music and art in particular are elements which are not found in the school system. They are highly, people are very highly skeptical of any music or art that comes from outside of the Islamic world, and specifically Saudi Arabia. It's getting better. I mean, in the last 10 years, things have tremendously improved. But back when we were starting this project, Western music was, almost a forbidden thing. Western art, was something that just wasn't present. And even local artists, even, community art and art shows would have to happen in underground situations. There's no art museums. There's no, celebration of the magic that art is. And so in creating the various, thematic spaces within this facility, we created a facade or a skin over these transformative exhibits that would help to expose young people and their caregivers to new ideas and new versions of art, new versions of music, so that they could start to slowly, open up their minds and see what else is out there in the world. But the skins that we put over it played to the comfort levels, or what we might call the affinity biases of those communities. So we attached it and we skinned it with stuff that was acceptable. So, for example, the art exhibit, which delved into design and color theory and patterns and all of that sort of stuff, is an Islamic arts exhibit, which Elif was instrumental in putting together. So we, in the flavor of an art form that is readily available in the community, that the kids and their families can actually relate to and see examples of, and is comfortable and acceptable, we layered in all of the the various things that you would see in a modern art exhibit, or that in a modern children's museum in the Western world that is unrestricted by things like that. So they get a chance to have all that exposure, but within the confines of an environment that is comfortable to them and won't put up those barriers, or won't, and we were afraid of it getting shut down at certain points, where the government would come in and say, oh, we don't like what you're doing over there, you can't do it anymore. So in a sense, it was a protective measure. In another sense, it was also a way to make it more comfortable for the audience that was coming in. And music being another example, you couldn't really just say, hey, we're going to have a music studio and come in and create music and all that sort of stuff. That would have put up a whole bunch of red flags and barriers. We called it the sound studio. And the exhibits that we focused on in that space were like environmental sounds, nature sounds, industrial sounds, and then how those sounds that are a part of our world everywhere, which you can't deny exist and have no cultural connection, can actually be combined into making rhythms and musical elements. And so the visitors would be able to come in and create compositions using all of these environmental sounds. And, just in that exhibit space, there would also be a few instruments, a few traditional instruments, a little bit of traditional music, which is acceptable. But then every so often, just kind of slowly pushing the barrier that tiny, tiny little bit and adding. So the plan over time would be to periodically, of course, update the exhibit. And every single time we updated it or added something to it, have it push the barrier just a tiny little bit more. And the next time a tiny little bit more, so that over the course of a decade or more, it would transform into being something that was very safe, very familiar, totally aligned with the natural affinity biases of that community. And then would be almost unrecognizable maybe 20 years later, and be something where it encompasses more of the whole world, more of all the different ideas that were out there and the possibilities. And then also, having that user-generated content in the sense that the visitor would be creating their own music, creating their own art, and contributing to the exhibit. So in very sneaky ways, we're very, very carefully trying to push boundaries without breaking what it was that we were trying to do. So
thank you so much, Michelle, for that overview and the revealing the secret sauce.
Very sneaky. You won't find that in the vision statement.
Thank you. And then next we have Nitin Das from India. He's the founder of he's a filmmaker and founder of Healing Forest. And Nitin, please, would you please introduce yourself and share your perspective? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Am I audible? I hope you can hear me properly. Good. So I'm calling in from New Delhi, India, which is home of the Himalayas, and also where the Dalai Lama currently stays. I'm going to start my talk by sharing a short 2-minute film, which gives you a sense of my work as well as my country. That's part of the project that I'm doing is called Healing Forest, which talks about how we can heal with nature And it's based on the Japanese technique of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, and where there is a lot of scientific proof which talks about how, as humans, as a species, we have evolved in nature, and nature is part of a place where we always belong. So when we are in nature, we are giving rest to our conscious mind and activating our subconscious side. And through this project, one of the walks that we do is a walk called the empathy walk, where we say that, empathy is very difficult to teach in theory. It's an experience, it's an emotion. Unless you can get people to feel empathy, there is no real way of teaching empathy. And nature is a great way to teach people of all age groups empathy. So what we do is we have created this short format of a 1-hour walk in nature. And the basic principles are to go in silence, to go slow, and to use our senses to connect with nature. And we give the participants small tasks. So the walk is divided into 5 sections, and each section starts with a question where we ask the participants to find something in nature. And I'll go through those sections now and tell you what those sections are. And then once the participants find that thing, then they share it. And what we also talk about is how to listen with empathy. And for that, we just say that you have to listen like a tree, silently and without passing any judgments. So that's our way of saying that empathy, how to listen with empathy, is to listen like a tree. I'm going to share those 5 sections, and what are those 5 questions that we talk about. Okay. So the first question we talk about is to find examples of struggle in nature. And when you walk in nature, you will find that, most of the times you're looking at the beauty, but if you look carefully, you will find a lot of challenges, conflict, and struggle also. And what we say is that, struggle is often the mother of empathy. When we are young, we're all struggling to grow. And we always find that mothers and parents who give us their care and compassion are where we learn the empathy from. So when we begin to look for struggle, we find really the source of what empathy is. The next question we talk about is find an example of gratitude. Why gratitude is important is because while struggle gives you the source of empathy, but gratitude is the sister of empathy. Just like struggle is the mother, because gratitude gives you the energy to act, and it gives you the energy to move forward and act on the empathy that you feel for someone else. The third question that we talk about is about finding interconnectedness, or we call it unity in diversity. And we talk about how, there are different wildflowers which you find in nature, but they all serve a purpose. What happens is that each flower is contributing something different to the soil. And it's because of this diversity that you can create beauty in nature. So we ask participants to search for diversity in nature and how it interconnects everyone. And this interconnected is a very important component of empathy. And the fourth question we talk about is how we can create relationships, or to find something which talks about kindness. If you look at birds.
I didn't catch that. Could you try again?
Sorry. If you look at the birds, when they fly in V-type formation, we know they fly in this particular way because the birds in the front is doing the harder work, and the younger birds and the older birds fly at the back because it's easier. The bird in the front cuts the wind current and makes it easier for the birds at the back to fly. So there are many examples of kindness and support in nature. And when you begin to see and observe those, you can learn empathy directly from teachers who have been practicing empathy for millions of years. And the final question we ask people is because, sometimes practicing empathy, or especially people who have a lot of empathy, they can feel burnt out. So it is really important to address that so that you don't really burn out with empathy unless you have empathy for the self as well. So the last question is to find something which is healing for the self, or an example which is healing in nature. So this is the picture that I find healing. It is about clouds. And for me, the clouds represent a constant change in nature. And they are friends of the wind that we talked about earlier. So I feel that these questions and this walk in nature really helps us get people to experience what empathy feels like. And I feel it's really important in our current situation, because the climate is changing and the way the earth is warming, we need to extend our empathy not just to other human beings, but also maybe to other creatures in nature. And beyond that, also to other geographical entities like forests and rivers and mountains, and maybe even further to the whole planet. So our empathy can extend to encompass not just us, but also our earth. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Nitin, thank you so much for sharing that beautiful film and these extremely helpful questions. I think these are like things that we can just try on our own and start experimenting with our own friends and family, and maybe in small communities, because this is actually how I grew up, how my father and mother, that's how we talked about nature, when we looked at nature. And it was so subtle, it was just a part of daily life. It wasn't really meant to be didactic or anything, but at every opportunity, these lessons were brought to surface and mentioned, right, and pointed out, for children to recognize. And I so greatly believe the power of these connections, and I'm very grateful for your unique perspective and sharing it with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I've attached a small poster with these 5 questions so that it'll become easier for people to remember. It's Perfect. In the chat box.
Perfect. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you. And next up, we have Gabby Salazar. She's an associate fellow at the International League of Conservation Photographers, and she will share with us her research findings and her journey in empathy building as a conservation photographer. Thanks for being here, Gabby.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is a wonderful break from writing my dissertation. So I am really excited to be here this morning, and I'm going to actually share a little presentation with you all with some photos, since I am a photographer. And let me just go ahead and share this. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about my journey from starting to take photos of nature to actually studying how people respond to different types of environmental images. And I started photography when I was 11 years old, and my father, who was an amateur photographer, gave me a camera, took me out in a friend's backyard bird garden, and I was hooked on photography in just a few minutes. And this image to the left is one of the first that I won a photo competition with when I was 14 years old, and it was taken about a mile from my home. And at that point, I was shooting with film rather than a digital camera. And I remember having to, sit in the hot sun, waiting for the bees to come in, and, really taking time to understand their lifestyles, what their movements, their patterns, their behaviors. And for me, that was a big step in kind of understanding wildlife and becoming interested in nature, and in starting to build empathy with animals. I went on to pursue photography professionally. And at first, a lot of my photojournalism work was just focused on taking beautiful images of wildlife from around the world. I really wanted to highlight overlooked species like this Mauritius day gecko on the island of Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. And I also started photographing people a little bit, really trying to display people's connection with nature. And that became a real interest of mine. But as I went around to different places and started working on projects all around the world, I also, of course, saw a lot of the impacts that we as humans have on the planet. And I started to really intentionally turn my camera to these images, to these instances and issues that I was witnessing, like illegally fishing sharks, or visiting wildlife markets to take photos of some of the species that are trafficked, like these baby macaques. And I started to feel a lot more empathy for these animals. And I also started to wonder, more about how I could use my images in larger campaigns or in bigger projects to start moving people to care more about these species. And I began to really do a lot of big collaborations with conservation organizations and environmental groups around the world, where I'd go in, write grants and go into a region or an area, work with groups to try to tell their stories, and then create photo exhibits or larger campaigns to get the message out. So this is an example from Mauritius, where I worked closely with the Mauritian Wildlife Foundation for over 6 months. And we produced a traveling exhibit that went to over 30 locations in the country, is still there, traveling to schools and museums when they need to use it. And it was really about the endemic species in Mauritius and some of the threats that they face. And I loved doing this work. And I got even more interested in it when I joined the ILCP, the International League of Conservation Photographers, which is this wonderful global community of professional photographers who are trying to drive conservation impact through ethical visual storytelling. I became an associate fellow there and became a community of over 100 photographers who are doing similar work around the world. But the more work I did, the more I started to wonder, am I being effective? Could I be more effective? And could we as a community be more effective in reaching the outcomes that we're trying to reach, whether it's increasing funding for conservation, building empathy, or helping organizations engage different audiences in their work. And so I took a deep dive into the literature to try to start answering some of my own questions. Questions like, what type of images actually influence people to support conservation? How do images influence our emotions and our actions? And do different audiences respond to different types of images? So should we be messaging differently for different groups in different places, in different contexts? And I first went and did a master's, and now I'm right in the middle of my PhD at the University of Florida, where I'm studying some of these questions. And so I just want to give you a very brief overview of one of the studies that I'm working on right now, because the thing that I think is really great is that we can empirically test some of these questions to try to understand patterns of how people respond to images. So one of the studies that I've been working on this year is an exhibit experiment in the Florida Museum of Natural History to try to understand whether images of pristine oceans and ocean environments, or images of those environments and animals impacted by marine plastic pollution, would result in higher engagement and pro-environmental behaviors. And we were looking specifically at donations to conservation and people's willingness to pledge to change their personal consumption of plastics. And so you can see here, rows 1 and 3 are the positively framed exhibit, and rows 2 and 4 are the negatively framed exhibit. And we actually put these exhibits up in the Florida Museum of Natural History for 6 weeks over the course of this summer. And half of the time the positive exhibit was up and half the negative exhibit was up. And about 28,000 visitors came through the museum during that time. And although it was the pandemic, in Florida, we actually had higher visitation numbers this summer than in 2019 pre-pandemic. So that didn't affect visitation too much. And we measured pledges to reduce personal consumption of plastics and donations to conservation each day. And we also myself and a research assistant set for 147 hours and tracked visitor behavior every day for 3.5 hours. So half of each day, we were actually sitting there in the museum, watching as visitors interacted with the exhibit. We had very specific protocols for who to track and how to track when they exited and entered the exhibit space. And I'll just share some of those results. So we tracked almost, around 1,200 adults while watching both the negative and the positive exhibit. We found that significantly more visitors engaged with the negative exhibit, and we defined engagement as stopping with feet planted, facing the exhibit or one element of the exhibit for at least 2 seconds. You can see that there's this difference here. So about 22% engaged with the negative, 12% engaged with the positive. But when you look at what we call diligent visitors, visitors that really spent time and engaged with 3 or more parts of the exhibit, we split the exhibit into 5 parts to do this tracking. The negative exhibit had significantly higher engagement. And it also led to more people talking with others in their group than the positive exhibit. There was, though, interestingly, a similar amount of time that people engaged when they did engage. We did find that the negative exhibit had more pledges than the positive exhibit, and that was statistically significant difference. But interestingly, the amount of donations was almost the same for both exhibits. And I could talk more about why I think this might have been, but it certainly tracks also with other experiments I've done and worked on in different contexts. So I think my conclusions from this are that, communicators should not shy away from these negatively framed images that show the impacts of human behavior on the environment. I think because we're at an empathy summit, I think one of, my kind of hypotheses for why that is that these images can invoke empathy, like this image of this turtle caught in a net. And some interviews that I did before doing this experiment, long form interviews with 48 individuals in Florida, do show that empathy is definitely one of these emotions that is triggered by these images and that motivates people to want to take action. And I do think that future research needs to explore these types of questions in different contexts and with different issues, because images are all around us and they're an important part of our communications. And we really need to understand the emotions that we're evoking with images and how those images track and link to attitudes and actions. So thank you so much.
This was fascinating, Gabby. Thank you for sharing. And thank you also to International League of Conservation Photographers, whose head, Susan Norton, is also here with us for this introduction. And this just provides such a new and amazing perspective to our conversation. And one of the things that I've also learned through my engagement with Gabby's and Susan's organization is that even when taking the pictures, right? I mean, conservation photographers have to have some ethics and empathy towards the wildlife and the animals, so not to disturb and not to breach in their sort of natural, daily routines or what have you, or not to scare them with drones. So this is just such a multiple layered thing. When we are talking about an image, there's this, pre-image, and then the image that we are looking at, and then afterwards, right, how we react to it. But as we learned on day 1, I think everything is intermixed. So so we're rediscovering that every day. So thank you so much for this perspective. And with that, I would like to invite any questions from the group. And Greg, if you can please guide us with some of the comments in the chat. And let's take another 10 minutes to get questions, then we can have a 2-3 minute break and then come back.
Thank you so much. And what a delight to see so many experiences sharing the ways that we can make space for empathy building. For all of you in the audience, you can see that I've spotlighted our colleagues here. And you are welcome to ask any questions or comments. The general comments throughout the chat box for all of you are people being really impressed and inspired about your different approaches. Lead away, I think you had a very good, interesting question for Gabby. I wonder if you might want to share your thoughts about that.
Yeah, sure. Am I posing my question, or is Gabby going to read it and answer it?
Why don't you pose the question for all of our benefit?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I was very interested, Gabi, because I think you're saying, if I understood you well, that there's more engagement with the negative exhibit than with the positive one. But in terms of behavioral outcomes, we have the same amount of donations, right? So I wondered then, what's the additional benefit of the negative exhibit? Like, is there anything else to get from there? And even, I mean, do we want more engagement if it leads to the same behavior? So that's...
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I think there's a couple things going on there. One is that it did lead to more pledges to reduce personal consumption. So negative did have a significantly higher number of pledges. So that's one behavioral outcome, but obviously intention to behave in a certain way is very different from actual behavior. So that we have to caveat with that. Donations are interesting, particularly with the donation box, just because it's really low involvement on the part of the donor. That's low risk. And some research has shown that with donation boxes, people are really just donating because of how they feel about the organization rather than maybe responding to particular framing. So that could be one explanation for why you don't see as much of a difference. But I think for me, to put this in broader context and to kind of like address the comment from Jim Wharton as well, I would not advocate for a whole shift towards negative images and negative framing, but there has been this really big optimism movement within conservation, which I think is very important. But there's not quite as much evidence for a strictly optimistic messaging strategy in the literature. And so I think what this says is like, we should use these with care, negative images, and this kind of like, because it can create emotional burnout over time, but we shouldn't shy away from it entirely. It can be used in appropriate ways to try to elicit empathy and to engage people, particularly people who may not have as much exposure and previous exposure, I think, to these issues as maybe somebody working in the conservation field. And I agree, Kirsten, one of my other studies suggests at least, and this is like, once again, just one study, that the combination of negative plus positive might be the most effective. Yeah.
Are you also measuring? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Lisa.
I get excited here. After this one, I stop. Are you also measuring personal distress here, or are you only measuring empathy? No.
No, we're not measuring in this study. We weren't doing, in order for it to be an experiment in which we weren't influencing participants, this was strictly observational in this case. Yeah. There's another study where I dive deeper with people, and I could share some information on that when it's out and get more of those individual perceptions. But yeah, absolutely.
I have actually a question for Nitin. And you mentioned, like listening like a tree, and listening has been a big part of our dialogue, throughout the summit. Even in Andrew's presentation, he suggested that we should focus our listening so that we can hear the sort of the far ends of a situation. So it is not just people talking, but it is also animals, the nature, everything around us is more of an embodied experience. Could you please elaborate a little bit on that?
I just want to say that, generally when we're in a group of people and then when somebody starts sharing, because most of the participants are so high in empathy, they often have this tendency to get into a problem-solving mode or a guru mode where, if they have lived through that experience and they try and offer some advice to the other person, which at that point of time in nature is not really what the other person is seeking. What the participants are seeking is just to share and create a shared experience rather than some kind of advice or some kind of, empathy. So just creating that space of being together in that moment with the person is what the walk is about. That's why we say that you listen like a tree. And that metaphor is very easy for people to understand.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And Andrew, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, gladly. I think the idea of listening begins with the creation of the space, as Nitin is very eloquently stated. The thing that comes to my mind is if we're if we're pursuing change, if we're desiring of change in a particular situation, there needs to be an agreement that that is the communal desire, right? In a teaching environment where advice or skills or anything is being conveyed, there's an agreement between the teacher and the student that the student is going to be moved, right? And that also that in the best of cases that the teacher will be moved as well, right? But that agreement is for kind of a mutual shift to hopefully occur. If one of the two in the relationship are not in that agreement, it ends up being, it can devolve into manipulation, which is fundamentally unhealthy, and then you end up having a kickback. So that's the thing that kind of comes to mind when we talk about, you know, desiring a shift in the way that we relate, or the way that we see the world or those around us.
Yes,
Right.
Andrew, thank you so much. That's really great observation. And it just occurred to me, you know, maybe one way of tying all the panelists, you know, conversation is to focus on equality. Like, let's say, you know, the experience of listening in all of your presentations. And you can consider listening in many ways. Let's explore listening in the next 5 minutes that we have, or 7 minutes that we have. And I would like to ask, so listening, what are those qualities that we should bring into a space, in making a space to make that kind of listening happening, you know? And I would like to ask Kevin, you know, Jaago is, you know, you can use the app as an individual, but you can also use it as groups. You can use it in companies. And I wonder, you know, what are some of the privacy, you know, when people share about their stories, and especially in corporate settings, do they really have this, you know, safe space where they can totally be vulnerable and open and transparent? And then, you know, what are some of the, or if there are some you know, power dynamics there that, you know, people could be, you know, so that the conversation is not manipulated, as, you know, Andrew suggested.
Yeah, no, I great question. I thank you for asking that. First, as far as privacy goes, we don't share people's names. Yes, your video is there, so you're visually there, but you can also not have your video. You can just point the camera at a toy or a wall and just record the audio. Those are options. But in the organizational dynamics, absolutely. That is fundamentally what we want to change, is that unsafe spaces to safe spaces. So the way we approach that is, first we say, before you ask any employee to share their story, we need the leaders, we need the C team to share their stories and be vulnerable. In fact, we have workshops targeted that we work with the leaders. We say, okay, first we're going to help you share your stories and be vulnerable, because if you don't do that, none of your employees are going to feel safe to do that. And that is a fundamental first step. And so when you see your colleagues doing it, and then you see your managers doing it and your directors doing it, that's when everyone else will feel safe. And I what's interesting is I do that at T-Mobile. I work at T-Mobile as well, and I have a team of 16 people on my team. And when I joined the team, there was a lot of anxiety around the team. There was a lot of and so what I did is I just would share my stories and vulnerability and just be shared. And now I'm so proud to say that just this week I got a survey. They did an anonymous survey, and then 100% score on psychological safety on my team and feeling no anxiety. And I am proud of that achievement because of this step of leaders have to speak up first and share their stories and show that vulnerability is courageous.
Thank you. This is wonderful. And I would like to move on to Jaago next. Jaago, when you engage children, what are some of the ways that you listen, or what are some of the ways that they listen to themselves and, you know, give you feedback? And what are some of the dynamics of that kind of listening when children are around?
I think with children, with listening, I think an important aspect to that is really engaging them with a sense of curiosity. So I do tend to feel that sometimes, generally, I do believe in listening being a very still practice. But when it comes to children, depending on age, often I find that just approaching them with stillness sometimes does not also prompt them to speak enough or to engage enough. So while listening is a very important aspect of it, to have those moments of quietness and stillness to hear what they have to say, they also really appreciate an element of curiosity. So kind of giving them prompts to kind of say, I am eager to hear what you're thinking, and what you're thinking in this moment is valuable and important to me. So I do feel that that tends to be a very important aspect to the listening with children. And when they have to listen as well, I think in that regard, I think playfulness, it's much easier for them to listen if it's being presented to them in a playful manner. So if you're just presenting things in a very monotonous voice, you're not being active in how you're expressing yourself, sometimes that quickly turns the space very boring and they don't feel engaged. So a lot of just finding ways of being creative and also getting them to be active while they are listening as well. So finding like little icebreakers, get them to stand up and maybe do some actions while you are saying certain things to them. So kind of engaging them continuously so that their brains are continuously active. I find that sometimes helps them with listening, which I think sometimes can be very different with adults sometimes, but yeah, that's my experience.
That's awesome. I'm noting some really interesting ingredients of alchemy of empathy, which I will share at the end of our little wrap up. And Gabby, I would love to get your perspective. Like as a photographer, what is listening to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I just associate it with kind of stillness and observation for me. I mean, that's a lot of what I do when I'm taking images is I take a lot more time to sit and observe before I actually move in with my camera, particularly when I'm photographing people. And so photography is almost like it's less active than it appears in a lot of popular media, where it's like the photographer running after the image. I think if you're really trying to create images that are meaningful, it really requires you to sit back and observe for a long time before you engage.
And I'm thinking, as you're describing this, thinking about Nitin's image of clouds. Really, one of my very favorite things to do is to watch the clouds changing in the sky. And the way you describe that, Nitin, makes me think this is visual listening. I'm not speaking to it. I'm just visually listening, if that's even there is such a thing. But the change, the dialogue is just really very lovely.
Right. No, I think even I agree with Gabby, and as a filmmaker myself, I would say that to create those images and films, you have to listen to your heart, and you have to listen to your emotions. So it's only when your emotions tell you that that's a great frame or that's a great picture that you click or that you shoot, because otherwise, there is so many images to choose from. Which one do you really choose, and why do you frame a particular frame? It's only when you listen to your heart and your heart says that's the frame. And for Zwiko, I totally agree with what you say. In fact, we have a very interesting exercise which involves playfulness and curiosity to teach children listening, and we call it the sound map. So they sit in silence and they create a sound map with pebbles around them, placing a pebble in the direction and in the distance of the sound. So if a bird is calling from, let's say, the north, they place a small pebble in that direction, and depending on how far they are, they extend their hand and create circles around them. So it creates a sound map by the end of the exercise, and you realize that not only the loudest sounds are important, but it's also the softer sounds that are equally present. But if you pay attention, you hear them as well.
That's
And
wonderful.
Andrew, it occurs that
Yeah.
you create a sound map whenever
Yes.
you're tap dancing.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say.
Well, one of the exercises that I do with my students is very, very similar in that, you know, we ask them to close their eyes and try and direct their hearing to the things that they hear, being silent first so that they can open their ears to all the things that are happening around us. Many, many times I find myself kind of inundated with input. And so to be still and to take in all the things that are happening, and then be able to kind of focus attention in different directions to see what I can amplify just in terms of focus, has been a key skill in my craft, and then, you know, expanded elsewhere.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And then I would like to just, transfer all that energy to Michelle to answer this question I'm really curious about. And I think it is relevant to all of our work throughout the summit, literally. So, I mean, throughout this event, we have been talking about, listening to people and understanding their concerns and responding. And, this relevancy always starts with listening. But sometimes, as you and I have experienced, you listen in, as everybody in this community knows that, like there are so many ways of listening. So they may not be exactly telling you what they need, I mean, you need to sort of figure out what is needed through many kinds of observations. I mean, we couldn't use the word empathy because it would have meant that there was a lack of empathy in that community, and that would have created a clash. Yes. But we went in other ways. But the way that we focused on empathy building, let's say on Islamic arts exhibition, was because we knew that there was a need, even though nobody had articulated, and they would probably nobody would ever admit it, at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, building on everybody, has been talking about, where listening is the actual, the act of what we traditionally understand as listening. Someone's talking, or you're, absorbing what's going on in an auditory way in your environment. There's the visual part of it, which definitely is, what you experience in nature, but then also, in normal environments. For me, there's an element that is completely surreal when it comes to listening, and that is like sensing the energy in a space. And that energy can come from the environment, it can come from the individuals or the creatures within that environment. And it's, whether it's auras that people have, or whether it's just the energy of a space. And so what I try to do, with what did try to do with my exhibit design, and what I do in my personal spaces and things like that, and we tried to do it, we did it in the Children's Museum and in the larger ITHRA facility, was to create environmental spaces that helped people to connect, reflect, contemplate, and just expand thinking. And so for me, like when I'm in, my home is a good example. I design it. It's like an environmental design thing, where it's like I place things and I organize and I design things in a way that gives these emotions inside of you that help you to feel. And I can't articulate it in words necessarily, because it's visual and it's very sensory.
I think, if I may, I think you're talking about this sacred space that Kabir Helminski was talking about, that everything is intentional. Yes. So if we are intentional in our, creating listening in our space is our intention. Here are some of the ingredients of alchemy that I've captured from all of our talks, if I may. So there's no judgment. Just make, and we can better articulate these are just my notes, but maybe no judgment or non-judgmental spaces, but no judgment. Just make space to be, and listen like a tree. And I learned from Kevin that role modeling in vulnerability is very important. So when creating those experiences of listening, I think maybe there should be some role models show people how it is done, and it is okay to do so. And then, and Jaago mentioned many great ingredients, curiosity versus stillness. So there could be a balance for different age groups, or getting different age groups interact with each other, allowing each other a chance to experience that dialogue. And active engagement, showing them, that you are here for them, that you are, and I might call this presence, perhaps, that you are fully present. And playfulness, in a playful way. So this is not something traumatic, or like, we are all human here, we're just doing human, like, this is like, there's no secret to this, basically, just be. And then, movement and creativity, in a space where creativity is free to happen. And then Gabby said, stillness with observation. These are also amazing ingredients of listening. And then others were mentioned, sensing, visual listening, listen to your heart. So heart listening. So that's also interesting. I think heart listening, I think it encompasses many things in it. It's like, as a full human, you just know when the timing is right. And in a conversation too, right? Like, timing is so critical sometimes when you like, show that you are present. And especially these things, I guess, happen much easily when you are in person. So thank you all very much. We should have another summit to talk about just the chat and all the ideas that we have about this conversation. And I hope that this conversation will go on. I'm so grateful for your presentations and your joining us today. And we are like 10, 15 minutes behind, but I think it's 12:38 right now. If we take maybe 3 minutes break instead of 15 that we have scheduled, and be right back so we can continue with the program, that would be great. Thank you all. See you soon.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for a very engaging and enlightening first half of our last day of the Designing for Empathy Summit. I welcome back now Elif. Thank you so much, Elif.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us again. So we are going to shortly begin with our next panel. Our friends from Seattle Aquarium and Woodland Park Zoo, they have been collaborating on empathy building for a very long time, and I think their learnings will be very useful to many of us here. So with that, I would like to pass it to Jim Wharton, who's the moderator of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Elif. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you may be joining us from. As Elif said, my name is Jim Wharton. My pronouns are he and him. I am the Director of Conservation Engagement and Learning at the Seattle Aquarium. Seattle Aquarium is located on the shores of the Salish Sea in the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. We are very fortunate to benefit from their leadership and partnership as we work together to inspire conservation of our marine environment. Now, we're very happy to be able to help to wrap up a really engaging week of panels and performances and presentations. Now, in our panel, we're going to offer a conversation around the influence of empathy on the development of our institutional cultures. Now, all of us are from zoos, aquariums, or from industry partners, and at a glance, you might think of us as animal-serving institutions. We care for animals, we work for their conservation in the wild. But modern zoos and aquariums, at least the credible ones, are conservation organizations at their core. And as some of you may have heard me say before, conservation at the end is not really an animal or a habitat problem. It's a people problem. People are simultaneously the problem, the solution, and the beneficiaries. Conservation is not an altruistic endeavor. Animal health and ocean health is human health. It's all wrapped up together in this concept that a lot of folks in our industry are now thinking about as one health. So if conservation is a people issue and we're conservation organizations, then it would follow that we're really people organizations. And in that context, it makes sense that empathy should be core to our missions and our culture. Keyword being should be. Now, well, we've learned a lot by bringing empathy into our thinking when it comes to our work in our community. We're also constantly learning, making mistakes, and evolving. So we very much fit that metaphor we've talked about earlier in the summit of building the plane as we fly it. So our panel is going to keep it very casual. We have a few panelists, and each will have a few minutes to introduce themselves and then say a few words about their work and their interest. And then we have a handful of conversation spurs. I think we'd also like to bring your questions and ideas in, so please put those in the chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye out for it. And we may also take an opportunity to react to an idea or two that's come up throughout the week. So much good stuff, especially this morning, that really aligns with certainly our missions. And so I think it'll be some good opportunities for conversation there as well. And so with no further ado, I'd like to kick it to my colleague at the Seattle Aquarium, Will Katel Mohammed. Will?
Thank you, Jim. Hi, my name is Will Katel Mohammed. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am the Empathy Fellowship Coordinator at the Seattle Aquarium. I've been on staff since October of 2019. So all of my empathy work has mostly been done over the pandemic and over the course of the last 2-ish years. And I think that's had a true impact on my work. So the way that I have come into this empathy work, as Jim, I think very astutely has said, is that empathy and conservation have no meaning without human interaction, without the human aspect. And so a lot of my work is really centered around working with my fellowship team of how can we bring empathy for fellow humans into our communities, and how can we use that as a springboard for conservation, for marine conservation, because I think, as I'm sure many of us that work in the zoo and aquarium realm, many people love our animals, and many people love our critters and love taking care of our critters and protecting them, and have a deep amount of empathy for some of our critters, but may sometimes struggle with that human aspect of empathy. And as we know, the same muscles that we use to build empathy for animals is the same one that we use to build empathy for humans. And I think I think our field needs a little bit more work on that human side. We need a little bit more work on that human side. And I think in order, a little bit of my work, or a lot of my work, is really addressing inequities in our world, especially again over the last 2-ish years. I think those have become really prominent, and in order to have a foster and have a true sense of empathy for communities, that especially ones that you don't come from, you have to be knowledgeable of the issues of their reality, and the issues of how we have impacted that reality. And so my staff and I, we really try to work on developing our, you might call it DEI, IDAI, whatever your acronym is, your diversity and equity lens, because I think that truly goes hand in hand with empathy work, in particular for empathy work with humans. And I just think it's really important. So I'm happy to continue talking about that as the panel goes on, but I won't take up too much time. So thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Great, thank you, Will. And next I want to move over to Sarah Brinkert, as our principal evaluator at the Seattle Aquarium.
Gosh, I love the sound of that. I'm so grateful to be part of the Seattle Aquarium organization and to be in this role. So my name is Sarah Brinkert, and my pronouns are she and her. And as Jim mentioned, I work in evaluation with the Seattle Aquarium. And my role is to look at the outcomes, right? Like what changes, what happens because people have the experiences that we create and provide and invite them into. And I get the chance to sort of study a breadth of experiences and contexts, from very specifically and strategically planned programs and interventions to more fluid and free choice learning experiences in our galleries and in our spaces, with the variation and the variability that comes from having live animals and from having, as Will mentioned, human beings who come to us with a diversity of motivation and background knowledge and goals and aspirations when they're in our spaces. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about a couple of the ways that having an empathy lens has informed and changed my practice as a social science researcher and evaluator. And I think about 3 qualities or 3 values that learning more about empathy has really imbued into my approach as an evaluator. And those 3 values are humility, curiosity, and an awareness of abundance. Now, the curiosity piece has always been there. That's why I got into evaluation, because I was passionately curious to understand what happens when people are in these spaces. What difference does it make if people visit a museum or explore an exhibit or see a coral or a sea animal? So the curiosity piece is always there, but empathy asks us to really elevate our curiosity and sit with that space of curiosity, to be open to the perspectives and experiences of another. Humility is something that informs that curiosity, right? We've talked about listening without judgment, listening like a tree, and that notion of we as an institution do not have all the answers. We are attempting to decenter ourselves in a space of authority, and instead welcome co-creation, and recognizing that what happens for folks in an aquarium is actually an alchemy of what they bring and the invitations and the platforms that we offer. And there's some magical mix that transcends our intentions or our goals. So that humility, knowing that we don't deliver learning, right? I'm a constructivist by training, by pedagogy, and I recognize that every individual is making meaning for themselves as they move through our spaces. And then finally, an awareness of abundance informs this understanding, and our Play Africa presentation really touched on this, with the image of the child as a protagonist, as completely capable and rich with abundance and originality and creativity. And that's how we see both our visitors and our guests as bringing with them completeness and abundance, and our animals and our ecosystems that we are attempting to reveal to our guests, is this sense of abundance, that there is so much to be understood. So it's really been a journey as an evaluator to adopt these approaches and let them inform my strategies and my techniques. And I have a couple that we'll talk about, but I think we're going to get into that a little bit more in a moment. So with that, I will pass to AR from the Woodland Park Zoo, and to hear a little bit about your approach.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Rebecca. I also go by AR. My pronouns are she, her, and they, them. I'm an evaluator, community organizer, and educator here in the Seattle area, so neighbors with the Seattle Aquarium. And I'm currently the evaluation specialist at Woodland Park Zoo, working on a project which we like to call the Empathy Collaborative. Now, the Empathy Collaborative is a community-based collaboration project intended to build long-standing, authentic relationships with the communities here in the Seattle area who we have not engaged for a variety of different reasons, either historically, traditionally excluded these communities, colonially oppressed through government and policies, and recognizing that as museums, as zoos and aquariums, we may have even caused harm in engaging with these communities. So this project is really looking to build authentic relationships with these community groups with the intention of having long-term relationships, recognizing that this work is very much ongoing. It asks our organization to really look reflectively at ourselves, at our practices and policies, to really dig into what it means to be an anti-racist organization and all the work that ensues. So it is no easy feat, this project, but a project that we are very excited about, and is really challenging our organization to consider, what does it mean to be in relationship with the community? What does it mean to have community at the center? What does it mean to co-create and co-design? So lots of questions. I'm sure we'll dig into it, but I'm just very grateful to be in this space with amazing colleagues and friends.
Thank you, AR. And from our friends at Zoo Advisors, Dr. Kathy Ann Khalil.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kathy Ann Khalil. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm very excited to be part of this panel today. I was formerly at the Seattle Aquarium, and they let me continue to get to play in the Empathy Sandbox, which is wonderful, because this work that I worked on at the aquarium has influenced so much of how I approach my work now. So I work for a group called Zoo Advisors. We are a strategic business and master planning consultancy that works with zoos, aquariums, and conservation facilities to kind of figure out all that stuff, right? And we take a very community engaged and equity focused approach to doing the strategic planning work. I have a couple areas that I would like to speak on really quickly, things that are in my brain that have been influenced in the past 2 years by the empathy work. The first is a program that I launched at a former facility that I was at called Conservation Justice Academy. That was for 6th graders, looking at how empathy can be used to create an anti-racist curriculum based in a zoo or aquarium that takes a hard look at our colonial history, the experiences of BIPOC individuals in nature-based careers, and what kids can do about that, what is within their locus of control, because we found through our empathy work that it's so important to offer solutions and pathways, and not just problems. In vein of that as well, I've been thinking a lot about, especially through the strategic planning work, what zoos and aquariums can be, right? And I think CJA was a big part of that, understanding that we can teach anti-racist education in a zoo or aquarium, and people are into it, people like it, and it goes over well. But also looking forward for a lot of the facilities we work with, a lot of what I do is helping them figure out, yes, how to, put an empathy lens on the things that they do, but also how to think about conservation solutions and this idea that a zoo can be a place that's an empathy gym, but also a giant maker space for figuring out future solutions to these conservation problems. So a lot of the work I'm doing right now melds the conservation psychology approaches that we know about, that empathy is part of, with this idea of designing and making, and how we can invite people into these spaces to express themselves in a variety of different ways that are all focused on creating an experience that's much like a museum of solutions, something dynamic that they can participate in and become part of that community.
So I love what you're saying, thinking about what zoos and aquariums can be, right? Because often, whether it's a museum or it's a zoo or aquarium, we end up in a rut, right? We allow ourselves to be defined by people's expectations of what a zoo or an aquarium can or should be. And I'm also thinking about what you were talking about, Sarah, about appreciating abundance, like everything that people bring to us. And we often sell our audiences a little short. I wonder, Sarah, if you would share a little bit about some of the work we've been doing for the fur seal exhibit enhancement, where you would ask some visitors about what kind of stories they'd like to see in a new fur seal habitat.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Fur Seal project is a renovation of an exhibit at the Seattle Aquarium that is habitat to our northern fur seals. Right now, just one fur seal, Flaherty. And the renovation is really cool because it's going to afford a new haul out. And if you are familiar with the body of a fur seal, it is literally a haul out. The fur seal hefts itself up onto the rock work. But what we're doing is right now, Flaherty's haul out is way in the back. And so when he wants to rest or kind of relax in that on a land area, he has to go to the back of his exhibit, and it is very difficult to see him. And one of the things that we know that helps to build empathy is for folks to have experiences, and especially if they can perceive an animal's face or its eyes. And so the haul out, the new one, will be in the front, so that Flaherty and hopefully his new companion will be able to be much more visible. And we're hopeful that it will actually increase some empathy outcomes related to visitors in that space. So as part of our project, we wanted to do some front-end evaluation to understand a little bit about what's happening in the space now, what are the empathy outcomes that we're seeing. And as part of that, we decided, well, let's ask too, like, what are people curious about? Like, what are they, as they're moving through this space, what are they taking away from it? And what do they wonder? What intrigues them about fur seals? And we gave them a multiple choice sort of battery of options. And there are some standard ones from, just exhibit development and kind of what we know are general interests among folks, and some that were specifically kind of tweaked to have some empathy content. But it was very surprising to me because as the data came in, unsurprisingly, the very first choice that everyone had was they wanted to know about how fur seals care for their young. And I think that that's a slightly coded version of I would like to see fur seal babies, please get some, which would be amazing, right? But right after that, hot on the heels, statistically, people indicated that they were curious and they wanted to know more, one, about both historic and current relationships between this species, this animal, and native peoples and indigenous tribes in the region that maybe shared the ecosystem over time and now. So they were interested and curious in these stories of indigenous culture and interconnectedness with fur seals. And second, right at the same sort of level of frequency, was that they wanted to know the threats that fur seals face in the wild and how they could help. And this, I should say that those two preferences, and so when I saw those two preferences, the first thing that I thought was like, oh man, I didn't sample this well. We've got, I bet we're going to see 80% of these were members. And those are the folks that we might anticipate having a little bit more of a tendency towards an interest in those topics. But when I looked at the breakdown, it actually was flipped. It was almost 80% non-members, and 60% of them had never visited the aquarium before. And I realized that I had made some assumptions and underestimated the readiness and the openness to some really important stories. And I might have downplayed those had I not asked.
Yeah, and I think it's this idea that there's our audiences are willing to see change in our institutions. They don't need us to be the same that we've been our entire existence. And so when you all are doing your work, how have you seen the empathy that we've been cultivating through our work and with our audiences, but also internally? How have you seen empathy act as a change agent within our organizations? Open question for anyone.
I think when used well, it gives us an opportunity to explore a side of this field that underlies a lot of the reason why we got into it in the first place. I'm thinking about the internal aspects, right? There's this patriarchal supremacist approach to science that says that only numbers count and the only thing that matters is knowledge and blah 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 blah. But the empathy work gives us agency to say emotions are real and you can measure them and you can intentionally work towards them. And I think that has been so big because now it's giving, it's not, I'm not going to say like we started it, but like now we're asking all these questions about what other affective states, what other things might we be able to dissect and look at with the same amount of rigor and complexity and understand, so that we're not just relying on the same old metrics to say, we've been successful and then wondering why nothing's changing and nobody's doing anything differently for the world. So yeah, that's one big, like kind of field wide change that I'm pulsing. I'm trying to figure out and see. And I think it has the power to have a really big, far ranging impact in how we think about our work.
I couldn't help but think about that on Wednesday when Kabir was talking about the sort of the quantitative measurable universe and the science orthodoxy, and then the qualitative human experience. And I feel like the empathy work is living on the sort of the border of those two things. It's empathy is about our qualitative experience, but it's not unmeasurable. And so it's something, and at least for our field, which is very science-y, our field kind of needed to see the research foundation of the empathy work in order to embrace it. And once they saw that there was something there, then it was like, oh, it's like a green light, and just people started charging into it. Will, how do you think without the empathy work, the fellowship will have developed the way that it has, like in a normal zoo and aquarium? And I know you're new to zoos and aquariums, but I'll ask you to speculate a little.
Yeah, for one, no, I don't. I don't. I think that empathy has been able to, I can use our empathy work as a tool in order to explore the other avenues, as we previously mentioned, around diversity, equity, inclusion, and ultimately, in my opinion, trying to shift hiring practices. I think within my program, we all have our traditional hiring practices of, if our field is like, you need to have a college degree, you need to have 20 or I don't know how many hours you need of volunteering to get. I'm sure many of you know how many hours, but it's some really high number. You need to have a college degree, a master's degree, a high school degree. You have to have all these things in order to have a clear pathway into this, not even clear, a pathway into this career. And empathy, the empathy work for me has allowed me to work with our HR department and work with our other hiring managers in order to kind of shift that a little bit, to shift some of our hiring practices to make it a little bit, to make it more equitable and to make it more intentional of who we're trying to do outreach to. And I think because of that, I'm able to have the diverse pool of fellows that I currently have. I get to have 3 women of color on my team that in all likelihood likely would not have been hired by the aquarium if they apply for any other position. And so really wanting to, I think, empathy has really given me and my staff and the aquarium as a whole a benefit of really leaning into these social justice spaces, but also being able to measure it. Because again, there's this entire idea that these things are immeasurable, that the qualitative does not matter as much as the quantitative, and that is not true. That's just simply not true. And empathy is a really good tool to chip away at that preconceived notion. And also I think empathy really allows us to truly examine the history of zoos and aquariums, and particularly in the U.S. Something that Kathleen was saying is that as we have this idea that zoos and aquariums can't be agents of anti-racist work. Well, it's like they very much were agents of racism. Zoos and aquariums started, or zoos in the U.S. started as zoos to see Black people within them as part of their exhibits, and we have to recognize that history in order to shift it and to work a way against it. And empathy really allows us to do that, and it's just one of the many tools that we can use in order to chip away at it. I'm not here to say that empathy is the only way to do it, is the only tool to do that work, but I do think that it is a pretty effective tool in my work and in the work at the Seattle Aquarium.
AR, do you feel like the empathy work has helped the Woodland Park Zoo engage more deeply with their community?
Yes, absolutely. But also with caveats. I think this empathy collaborative project that we're on here at Woodland Park Zoo has really challenged us to rethink the ways that we have traditionally done community engagement, and how do we move forward with building authentic relationships with community groups. When you think of museums and how they traditionally engage with communities, it's more often outreach. It's not engagement, it's not reciprocal relationship building. It's very much this unilateral, unidirectional flow of information, where we have these resources, these services, these programs, and here community, you can come to these events and experience something for yourself. And rarely do we take the opportunity to really sit and listen and internalize what we're hearing from community themselves. And so what this project has really done is it's forced us to slow down, and it's forced us to really engage in listening of our community groups. And I will say our communities have been saying for years, we want to be a part of the process. I'm so grateful to be in an area where we have a lot of grassroots organizations. We have very active community-based organizations, and they've told us year after year, we want to be a part of this process. And I think it's not just hearing them, but listening and internalizing that, and really recognizing that we have to show up in a way that is humble. Sarah, I love the 3 different aspects that you brought in, because I think humility is such a big aspect of this work. And it's recognizing that our organization doesn't have all the answers. Our communities, and this is my personal perspective, I believe that communities are the experts of their own people. they know what their needs are. They know what their goals are. They know what their assets are. They know what they want to achieve. And it's our responsibility then, because we are a privileged organization. We have services, we have funding, we have programs, we have animals to meet communities where they're at, so that we can be relevant and we can build something in collaboration together. So it's a challenge for us, because I do think that we often fall into these, white dominant culture norms, white supremacy norms, where we have to do everything urgently. We have to be right. We don't have room to fail. There's only one right way of doing things. And it's really challenged not only the ways that we engage with our community groups, but also how we engage internally as an organization. How can we collaborate authentically with community groups if we can't authentically collaborate internally across departments? And so, that's a whole other area that I can go into, but it's really challenged us to rethink what it means to be in relationship. It really challenges us to think, what does it mean to collaborate? And it forces us to think about authority and power, and who gets to tell the story and who gets to share their narrative.
I think that this community, the summit community, has a very high opinion of empathy and feels like, of course, empathy is often the solution, but empathy can't always be the solution, right? Like when do you feel like empathy is not the right tool, either in your work or in trying to solve some sort of problem within the organization?
Something that I have learned over the last year is that empathy without boundaries can lead to self-destruction, and that you need to have, when you are practicing empathy work, you want, your heart is so full, your brain is so full, you want to be a part of all these different works, but like, you're just one person, you're also just one person. You cannot pour yourself completely into everything, because that one, you're just doing a disservice to yourself, you're doing a disservice to the work, and you're doing a disservice to the core like tenets of empathy, because you also need to have empathy for yourself. And I think that when we're doing this work, when I do this work, I tend to forget about that part, about the empathy for self, and tend to overwork, because we care about it. And then it goes into these these really toxic workplace practices that we have, particularly in the nonprofits and education sectors, of like, I deeply care about this work, this is doing good things, but it's also damaging to me. And in order for empathy to be effective, you have to have boundaries for yourself, and you have to have empathy for, and you have to have boundaries for your colleagues and for the people that you are working with in the community. Because ultimately, if you don't do that, you're going to exhaust yourself and burn out. Empathy is not a limitless resource, is ultimately what I'm learning, is that it is a limited resource, and you have to prioritize where it goes. And that's kind of tricky, because you're like, I want to have empathy for everything and everyone. It's like, yeah, but some people need it more than others. Like some groups need it more than others. And take from that statement what you will. I think you know when I say that, what I'm thinking of. And so for me, empathy isn't effective when it is used when it's used in a vacuum, when it is the only tool being used. It is just one tool in our kit that has to be used in collaboration.
I would say, going along with that, we need to have clear, I think part of establishing the boundaries of empathy is figuring out where the clear asks are, right? I see empathy really falling apart when it's like dumping all of this emotional weight on somebody and then giving them either an action that doesn't seem to alleviate the problem, or giving them no action at all. We know from some of Carol Saunders' work that leads to a boomerang effect, where people go into self-preservation mode, right? Because I mean, we saw this a lot with the climate narratives that came out, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, where you see this polar bear crawling across the tundra and it's literal last legs. And then it's like, so drive your car less. And people were like, I don't, like, that doesn't match to me. And now a polar bear is like a trope, like we just didn't give people something they could actually do that felt like it had a measurable, would make a measurable difference. And so people went into self-preservation mode and they just shut it off. right? We talk a lot about moral disengagement and the Sarah McLachlan ASPCA commercial effect. But I think that's really real and a really interesting part of the human protection mechanism.
I think it came up a little bit earlier this week as well. I think when we use empathy to only emphasize similarity, then I think we run the danger of washing out the things that are important about the other that we're empathizing with. And when that's people, people don't. I don't think anybody really wants to be washed out into sort of some generic idea of humanity and want to be celebrated for what makes them uniquely themselves and everything they bring to not just a relationship, but to work and to your organization. I want to change gears a little bit because I was struck by many of the presentations this morning, and I was thinking about the idea of an empathy walk, and I would love to hear your thoughts in how a zoo or aquarium can be or falls short of being a stand-in for a walk through nature.
I'm really attached. Oh, sorry, AR, did you want to go first?
Oh, no, go ahead and I'll follow up. Not a big deal.
I've been spending a lot of my free time lately thinking about how zoos and aquariums can be behavioral rehearsal spaces. And so I want to counter that or challenge it with, maybe they're not exactly replicas of nature, but maybe that's okay, right? Like maybe the fact that they're kind of sanitized versions of nature makes nature a little less scary to those who don't have the privilege of being able to go out in nature and feel safe and feel comfortable in that space. I really like the idea of coming to a zoo or aquarium and being able to bring your kids and say, okay, well, someday I want to go to a national park, but I never went to a national park as a kid. It's going to be a big deal. So let's practice what it might look like to go to the national park here at the zoo. Like, these are the people you might see. Like, these are the animals you might see. Like, here's how you throw away your trash. Like, all the things that would make you feel like you're part of that experience when you finally get there, and may even push you into saying like, oh, okay, like this is something that I could do more of. And so I like thinking about the experience that way, and thinking about how we might intentionally plug some of these behavioral rehearsal opportunities or moments into the zoo or aquarium experience so that people feel like they're in a version of nature that feels accessible, somewhere where they can fail or make mistakes, and still learn, and not feel like so much of an outsider when they get to the real thing.
Yeah, AR.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kathy. And I think it segues really well into what I was going to share, which stems a lot from John Falk's motivations, a motivation of visitation. You know, the reason why people come to zoos and aquariums varies for a variety of reasons. Some folks want to facilitate experiences for those they're bringing to the space. Some folks want to experience something new and novel. Some folks are learners and they want to gain some type of knowledge or education in their experience. And some people just want to feel, right? They just want to be in a space where they can have their feelings and it's okay to do so. And for the zoo in particular, you know, I think this was an unintentional outcome, but I think something that Kathy Yoon was alluding to is that in 2015 and in 2016, we saw quite a few white supremacist movements in the area in the US. You know, we had, and sorry, trigger warning, I'm going to name some events here. So I want to apologize in advance if this triggers anybody. But we had the Pulse nightclub shooting. We had the Charlottesville massacre. We had, you know, some pretty tremendous and atrocious events happening in our country. And we didn't do this intentionally, but what we did find is that people were coming to our zoo because they felt safe, because we had walls. And often I think of walls as barriers, but in this case, I think of this wall as a way to create safety for a community who was very much hurting at a time and didn't really know how to respond. We as an organization, you know, we sent out emails and, you know, tried to be responsive to community, but we didn't know what to do either. but we created unintentionally, had these spaces where folks could feel safe, where folks could cry. I think that's the beauty of nature. I think nature provides these spaces where you can be witnessed, and you can have sacredness and security. And that was something that our zoo could provide, even though that wasn't something that we intentionally created. And so I think about what is that possibility if we were intentional about creating these spaces where folks could be witnessed, could be seen, and there could be places for healing.
About being of and part of community, right? And being in community with your community, and recognizing the needs. And we talk about sometimes in conservation, what's needed to stop, like say poaching, is not enforcement, it's a school. And sometimes for us to create the relationship with our community that we need in order to move our conservation organizations forward, we need to provide what the community needs and not just what we perceive that we need as a conservation organization. So I'd love to turn over to some questions if people have them. And I guess, Greg, I don't know if you want to facilitate this or if folks want to ask questions either in the chat or out loud, but happy to have a few questions in the audience. I've been skimming a little bit. Some of the questions in the chat have been answered by panelists already, but love to hear if anyone has any questions for AR, for Sarah, for Will, or for Kathy-Yoon.
Thank you so much, everyone. And as Jim suggests, if you do have a comment or a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and let's engage in a dialogue. We've got a nice intimate group here. And as folks are putting their thoughts together, Elif, I know you're taking notes madly with all kinds of thoughts and responses. I wonder if you have any leading questions for our colleagues.
Thanks for putting me on the spot. I have many questions. I'm learning so much. This is just fascinating. All the angles that that we can look at this empathy work. So thank you so much for bringing this multifaceted look at what empathy building, or just having the intention of building empathy in your organization might look like in real life. And I'm really fascinated by the aspects of zoos and aquariums, especially to reach out to communities and creating those spaces for social justice, like Will mentioned, through hiring practices, through fellowship opportunities, through, like an AR mentioned, just showing up in a community with an authentic intention of being long-term, being in a long-term relationship, and showing humility. And I mean, this just shows that how deep this work has to go, and how much work that we each have to do. And it just reminds me once again that this is a cyclical work. This just really never ends. We just learn and keep improving, I guess, to the best of our abilities. So I don't have a specific question right now, but well, actually I do. So let's do this. I think one of the, going back to, some of the other days, conversations over the summit, I know that, both Woodland Park Zoo and the Seattle Aquarium has these, empathy building activities that you offer and you train your staff with, to get them to engage with the audiences, the visitors, in a way that also expresses, how the institution is showing empathy towards the animals, and basically being a role model of how we can also engage with animals, giving the animals agency. I don't know if that's the right word to use. So giving them personalities, creating stories around them, providing enrichment activities and all that. And we also talked about making these such offerings scalable and maybe utilizing them in different contexts. And I'm just going to jump over to a whole different area here, in terms of scaling up. how might some of these, and this is like an open question to all the community here, how might some of these thoughts and ideas presented or the empathy building workshops that we have experienced would look like, for example, in an art museum? Or how would it look like in a natural history museum when we're talking about the planet itself? What does community engagement look like in that? What does creating safe space look like? Or how do you build empathy? How do you give agency, for example, right, to fossils? I mean, I'm just really thinking hypothetically, but or an artwork that is not known, like who made it or where it was made. It's not known, but it is in a label. It might be just labeled as this is from Africa, as if Africa is just like a single place. I mean, like single, like everything in Africa is the same, and so I would love to hear your perspectives about, whether you as the, zoos and aquariums people ever think the implications of your work in different settings.
AR, I see you nodding your head quite a bit, and I'm wondering if what you'd like to share with us here.
Yeah. Oh gosh, thanks for putting me on the spot, Greg. I think what it comes down to me is the aspect of relevance, and seeing relevance as an act of empathy. And I think part of that, coming from a community-centered perspective, is meeting people where they're at. The communities that we engage with as zoos and aquariums may or may not be the same as the communities who attend natural history museums, who attend art museums. And yet we recognize that as individuals and as community groups, we have intersectional identities. And so we may be tapping into similar communities, but maybe not. But I think with regards to evoking empathy through different museum environments, I think it's about meeting people where they're at and understanding, what is their relationship to these objects? What is their relationship to the museum? Recognizing that museums have a legacy all their own. What is their relationship to the content and to the area of focus? And what are their stories and narratives and their own lived experiences that can connect to the object or topic at hand? I think empathy is a tool like any other tool. And I think it's up to the situation and the context to refine that tool to best meet the needs of the people. So that's kind of a generalized response, but I think that's where my brain is kind of going in that direction.
And AR, I think I love the idea, what you're talking about with we all serve different communities. And that's why I love the idea of partner programming. When you look for an excuse for a zoo or an aquarium to work with a completely different kind of museum. The juxtapositions that are created are fascinating. And this idea of the limitations that we put on what or whom we can empathize with is a very Western objectivist perspective, right? And so the idea that you can't empathize with a plant or a landscape or an object, that's a very narrow Western restriction. And I think the more that we can do to expand that, and that's what it was enough of a leap for us to help people see and have empathy with a barnacle, right? So barnacle doesn't have emotions, can't have empathy. Well, it has a perspective of the world. A plant has a perspective of the world. The landscape has a perspective. It responds to stimuli in the same way that a living thing does. And so I think the more opportunities we have to push the boundaries on who you might collaborate with. So it doesn't mean a zoo or aquarium has to collaborate with a natural history museum because there's all this overlap, or a science museum. But why not an art museum? Why not a cultural museum? Why not these other kinds of spaces? And you end up not having to push that hard to find the similarities and the themes and the sort of interesting pathways for those potential collaborations. And I think that's a big part of scaling. You can get to these larger audiences by creating communities within our community.
Yeah, and I almost wish that that these our discussion with the shared values panel yesterday these perspectives are so essential. All the perspectives that you've presented here are so essential, but I bet, are hardly even mentioned in any corporate scenario. I mean, they might have like different ways of addressing some of these, but not to the extent and the subtlety and the sensitivity that you're approaching the subject. What I'm trying to say is that, this approach in its own is so unique and can be beneficial to any institution to explore and learn from your experience of, how, in multidimensional ways you are looking at the at empathy and empathy building. And I would like to just address something here. And I think there was and I'm not really good at following the chat, but I just noticed this, that somebody posted, I think maybe Edwin, this question about, how do you empathize with racism? And I would like to just, share my personal feeling about this, and, as not an authority or anything. But I do believe that there's, darkness in this world. There's, there's good and evil, and I don't feel the necessity to empathize with evil. There's, there could be racist people, and I can maybe listen and learn from their stories as a human condition, that all the, the reasons why they are who they are, who they have become, with the hope that, they might also find the light, and hopefully see the world in a different way that is more inclusive, including themselves. But I don't see the necessity, or to really. I think boundaries is a good word for here, right? and that's, that it has to also, there are boundaries basically, and because when you talk about racism, why do I have to empathize with racism? Like, who's asking me that? Who's in power? There's so much power dynamics going on there. Why is that even a question? I mean, as Will said, there are so many groups and, individuals and, other, creatures that may require more empathy. Why should I give my attention to that particular issue? And our attention is probably the most precious thing that we own in this world, that's where everything is grabbing for our attention. And I think it is very precious thing, sort of a resource that we should use constructively, and with the intention of heading to love and compassion, rather than immersing ourselves into something that is wrong. So that's my personal take on it, and I don't know if anybody else would like to comment that, but because I think that sparked some emotional response. But I just wanted to address that as the host of this space, like that's where I'm standing.
Will?
I'd love to take a gander. As Jim knows, this is some of my favorite stuff to talk about. I definitely, and thank you, Elif, for your comments, and Edwin for your links as well. And if folks can, even if you want to take a little peek at the link that Edwin had sent, I think when we have this idea of having empathy for racists, especially here in the US, racism as we know it has been built on this binary of white versus black, with everyone everyone else falling in between. And I do think there is a place to have empathy and compassion for racists, especially for white people like myself, or mixed people like myself that present as whites in certain spaces. There is a place to have that empathy and compassion, because we also benefit from that same white supremacy. We still benefit from that same anti-blackness, and we still benefit from that same othering of everyone else here in the US. That's not me saying that I think we should send in Black and brown people into KKK rallies to educate and listen and be with them, because that's potentially extremely dangerous situations. That's asking a lot of labor, both physically intensive, emotionally intensive, mentally intensive. And I would question those of us that are in the audience that are white and on this panel that are white or non-Black, why we would place this expectation on Black people to have this empathy for people that quite literally want them dead. and quite literally want to see them wiped off the face of the planet. That is not their responsibility to do that. White people as white people, it is their responsibility to work within their communities to dismantle these things because it is simply wrong, because it is the wrong thing to do. But I also think you can't always make change happen when you're incessantly telling people that they're wrong because they think that they're right. And you telling them they're wrong isn't going to cause that shift. So I think also recognizing like, yeah, I did racist things too. I myself was a racist. And I think a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that and to own that for themselves, because who wants to claim themselves as a racist? Nobody wants to do that per se. But you have to do that because if you live in the US, you're white and you grew up here, surprise, you benefited from racism, and you probably did think you for sure have done things that are racist. And you have to own that. But a lot of people, we are obsessed with this idea of not being perceived as racist versus being anti-racist. And people don't want to, in order to be anti-racist, there's a huge part of self-acknowledgement and working to decenter yourself and to deconstruct those notions that have been fed into you all throughout your life. So that is all to say, yes, I think there's a place for empathy for racism and those that are in race that are racist. I think there is a place for that, but it deeply matters who and where it's coming from and who and how it's being used. So it's very complicated. But again, I could talk about this for hours, and I tried to do something that I could talk about in 5 hours and 2 minutes. So please reach out to me if you want to continue this sort of conversation.
Thanks for your thoughts, Will, and thank you all to the panel for participating and sharing your thoughts. And thank you to Elif and Greg for providing us this platform and an opportunity to share what's happening in Seattle and beyond with our partners, and look forward to just spending more time with this community and moving this work forward.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for participating. This was a wonderful conversation. And I also received a question regarding the chat. You know, the chats are also recorded as well as the talks. So hopefully, after a few days, after we wrap up the last workshop, I will put everything in a shared folder for you to download, and I'll give you a time frame for access, so everybody will have access to all the recordings. And so Greg, turning to Greg, and maybe we should take a quick break.
Yes, thank you all so much. So if you would just maybe take a 3-minute break and we'll reconvene. And Elif, I know you'll have some wrap up and discussion and reminding us about our intentions and our commitments. So we'll be back in, let's just say 3 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, as we head into the home stretch on our final day, full day together. Elif, I know you have, for the last 3 days, been taking many notes and making many observations. And I think here's a wonderful opportunity for you to start to coalesce those for us, perhaps, as a conversation starter here.
Thank you. And actually, I could use my slides because they have visual reminders for us to perhaps really just conceptualize.
Elif, is there a place you want me to start?
Well, we can just, I don't know if most people are here. I don't know if we should give them, yeah, intentions and commitments are the right page. Maybe, yeah, let's keep it here and maybe give people 1 more minute. And for this session, if possible at all, I would appreciate it if you could turn your cameras on, if possible, so that we can, I feel like I'm talking to some people. Thank you. It is just this with Zoom, it's just hard to get this in-person feeling, and this is that kind of a conversation that really requires that. So much appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, and also, you know, it's good to know like how many people are back from the break. So as we all know, you know, I had requested everyone to arrive with the intention to the summit, and okay, let me just start my chat also just in case. Yeah, sure, no worries about, you know, bandwidth issues. If you have experiencing bad Wi-Fi or anything, don't worry about it. It's just that as much as possible, it would be nice. Thank you. And so, well, this is our hour, basically. You know, we have approximately, I don't know, almost like 50 minutes to go until 2:30 to talk about all the things that we want to talk about. And I try to get us a little bit structured, and maybe if I can gather my thoughts quickly, we can go on to the next slide. I have these visual reminders to just hopefully just inspire us to talk about, you know, go back to the first workshop and then the first day of the summit, and and I'm going to share one of the illustrations that my brother does for his children's books, and this is a, you know, fable, of course. You know, you may know this you know, lion and the rabbit. That, you know, there was this, you know, a ferocious king living in a forest, and he demanded that a animal just sacrifices himself or herself to him each day, so he doesn't have to hunt, and he has his belly full. And one day, the bunny, you know, all the animals do this, and they're in fear and they're extremely oppressed. And the bunny has this clever bunny has a different idea, and he intentionally becomes late to his appointment with the king, where he is supposed to be the dinner, and he says, oh, you know, he arrives a little late and he's all tattered and bruised and, you know, like all fur ruffled up and everything. And he says, oh, so I'm so sorry, my king, you know, I'm late. I really wanted to be on time, so please, you know, forgive me. But there was this other king, you know, on the other side of this village, and he just kept me from, you know, coming to you to serve you. And the lion was immediately, you know, who's that other king, you know, in my kingdom? And he's like, you know, well, you know, I can take you to him, you know. So the rabbits, you know, on the front, and the lion follows him, and they walk a little bit and then arrive at this well. And that lion just, you know, lunges at the well and just looks up and immediately sees his own image in the bottom of the well. And he sees this like angry, ferocious, you know, face looking back at him, the king. And he says, he roars rather loudly, and it echoes in the well. And then he even becomes more angry, like, how can you even talk back to me? And he launches in the well to his death. And then, you know, this is the story that I it reminds me that, you know, sometimes we need a mirror to see the reflection of our own behavior. But can we create that kind of mirror that actually provides that reflection and an opportunity to reflect and contemplate and consider change, behavior change, rather than just promoting the same type of behavior of, you know, anger and oppression and egotism? So I believe that those kinds of mirrors, I think we are trying to create those mirrors. And I don't know if anybody here from the workshop of the colleagues from the Phillips collection, that they use this beautiful artwork. I think it was a definition of gravity or something like that, but it was basically what it was anti-gravity. It was just like glass beads in beautiful connections dangling from the ceiling. And the artist's intention was to use each of those glass beads as a mirror to the other one. so that they all realize that they are connected and they are parts of something greater than each of them, and collectively they create something really, really magnificent. So that's my question. Like, if we consider creating those mirrors through empathy building, what would they look like? What is the intention of that? You know, and what kind of space, what kind of you know, qualities that mirror should have that perhaps can lead to, you know, positive behavior change, and get the lion to think about his own actions and his own ego, and let go of his, you know, destructive sort of ways of being and existing in this world. And then the next slide, please. And we also talked about, you know, empathy as being a lens through which we can view our world. And the goal with that is not empathy, not to put empathy as the end product of our activities or efforts here. Empathy as a starting point. And as we found out from the, you know, our very last panel, that how this is all intermixed, right? It is like the beginning. There's almost no end and no beginning. It's a spark with an intention, but it goes into soul searching, and then, you know, reaching out to community, and then through that mirroring, you know, finding out more about yourself and trying to adapt and become better. So the idea is to be able to present this lens as a considerable option, if they are willing to choose to use to as many people as possible. That it is possible to use to view the universe and the world and our existence in it through an empathic lens. But it is a choice, because there are so many other, you know, designer brands, and, you know, easy to, like, you know, cheap brands versus more expensive brands. There's so kinds that, you know, when you go to get a pair of sunglasses, imagine all the decisions that you make through. So it is definitely a choice and an intention. So what does it take, you know, to really put our intentions in the right place, and try to be places where people who we are in connection with also see that, like, this is a way of looking at the world, and this is an option, and this is what we are trying to do, and we are learning along the way. So we are not experts in this, but, you know, we're just trying to build this lens, basically. And then the next slide, please. And then, of course, the ingredients of the alchemy of empathy. I think, I mean, when I finish going through my notes, I'm pretty sure I have at least, you know, 50, 60 more of those gathered. You know, I think these 13 were included in the Designing for Empathy book. But the thing with these, you know, and I think maybe we should do something with that. You know, I might just send you a template of some drops, and you can fill them in and send them back or something. I don't know, we maybe create a like summit mural somewhere where we all, you know, add our drops. And so just inviting all artists, you know, everybody who has any thought, you know, can we create, like, at the end of the summit, our new type of rain? So what we have discovered in this. And as you know, that I've mentioned, in, you know, throughout the summit, like these were just meant to be conversation starters. And but what I learned by, you know, putting together the book, you know, with all those amazing contributions from authors, and also through the my own personal journey through the summit and the workshops, is that not only each drop within this drop contains many drops, so they are, you know, they're sort of like interbeings. You know, they don't have sharp edges or elbows that, you know, like you need to align. They're they just like mix and mingle with each other. They're intrinsic to each other. So there's really no parts to take apart. They're all one thing, but they just appear, you know, differently on, you know, different contexts. So in some contexts, it could be play and, you know, curiosity, like Juiko's, you know, Play Africa project. It could be maybe play and curiosity and more sort of, you know, action oriented. But in other places, it could be intersectionality, it could be storytelling, it could be synchronicity. And and I'm sensing that, from all the experiences that I look at through this lens of these ingredients, one is not enough. Even though that one drop may have different qualities to it, just setting your goals on just play is not enough. I think you have to have at least 3 together, and combining with all their internal qualities, they just multiply. They just give you, but the basic is like 3 of them. And I'm thinking that this could be useful to individuals, and in designing our own lives, and in our communities, to keep that in mind. They also help us being more intentional. When I put something and equality in writing, it becomes its own thing, and it just sticks to your mind, and you start recognizing it over and over and over. Just like what happened to us with listening, like in our first session, we were talking about so many different things, and some of them aligned in so many ways, but there were also very new, nuanced approaches, that the fresh approaches that came up. So these drops are to capture those, and we have a long way to go. And maybe in a year's time, maybe we can take an account of these every year, and then try to sort of consolidate them into more meaningful, well-articulated drops, so that we can also share them to others, because each of them really have representation in so many ways. The next slide, please. And of course, the way we look at the world is so important, that how we are seeing the problem is essential in how we address solving it. And one of the things that I've learned from our summit and the workshops is that this is a super complex issue. It's not a simple thing that we are dealing with. It is multidimensional. And it requires, being a learning person, learning organization all the way. But I think it was Kirsten who mentioned the systems thinking is essential to keep in mind, that we are all parts of one. Literally, what goes around comes around. So I'm seeing this challenge of 2 things, I think. First of all, as empathy builders, we need to realize that we are parts of something greater than ourselves. Talking about Sarah's, awareness of or appreciation of abundance, right? We are free, it starts with us. But then also realizing that the problem we are looking at is multifaceted. So we may never even have the full picture in front of us, but we can have that mindset that, there's more to this, and whatever there's out there more that we may not be seeing right now is also connected. It's also intermixed with this, because there's really nothing but us. Us meaning humans, environment, the planet. So what goes around comes around. What happens in one affects the other and the all. So with this mindset, I think we should start building that lens that we are talking about. I think this oneness mindset is critical to position our conversations around empathy. And it came up, in many times in many panels and workshops that, empathy has it's a multicultural thing. It is important that the lens, that the worldview that you are bringing to the table. Why do you choose to empathize with that and not the other? So it is it's a cyclical sort of and perhaps infinite development opportunity. And the last slide is I would like to also think, that within this oneness mindset that I'm trying to explore more myself, what are some of the other questions that we need to ask as a community? Are we asking the right questions? In my book, as a conversation starter, I suggest this 3 essential questions to begin any empathy building initiative which is the first question is, what is the object of your empathy? Who you are trying to empathize with, and or what? And in my mind and heart, that is the oneness of all beings. So not just one thing, but it could start with one if we also keep the greater context in place. So can we really empathize with the oneness with ourselves? It turns back to self-empathy, really. Can we empathize with the reality of our existence, that we are all connected? And also, what are some of opportunities that we can invite new perspectives to our conversations? I'm personally finding it, as a journey. It has challenges, and thanks to like many friends and yourselves and your many contacts and the contacts that you bring to the table, I'm able to access, new perspectives, new voices who have not been here before, but they may have arrived just for the first time this year. But it is not easy for me to explain what I'm trying to do, what we're trying to do. So I would really, really be grateful if you can please share with me. I mean, I included that question in the survey. How would you describe what we are doing here to another who has never been a part of this? That would help me greatly to maybe expand what the definition of designing for empathy. To be honest, that's the first time I was able to articulate and actually start telling people at the beginning of sessions, if you have noticed. And that was also intentional, that I did that each person, so each time, because I want to get feedback. I want to learn, like, does this make sense? Or she said this in the beginning, but that's not what happened at the end. I didn't get that at all. So I would like to really get at, what we are doing here. And yesterday, it was just so lovely to see some friends in person. After our summit, there was Reyhane, John Wettenhall, and Allison. It was just 4 of us just gathered for a couple of drinks, and it is very important to keep community. So I would also encourage each one of us to really keep community where they are, just keeping this sort of summit thread in their conversations, and also, if you are visiting from somewhere else, and if you are in my community or any community that is represented here, please, please do say hello. Just reach out and send an email. I'm in town, let's meet and catch up. We can always do that through Zoom too, as much as we can. We don't need to really physically travel, but this catching up and keeping community is very important, because like over the last year, it was such an enriching experience. Just even being stuck in my office and this desk and this chair at home most of the time, we were able to do this very first public empathy building workshops, and we brought it to life. Now it is a real thing. It is out there, and we didn't have hundreds of people signing up. We had very limited registration, because people generally don't understand what we are trying to do, and how relevant this could be for them. So I need help with that, but also keeping in touch and innovating, keep talking and sharing ideas. I'm open to explore new workshop. As you know, I'm very passionate about experiential learning, our workshops, because that's how we can actually show people. I may not be able to write well enough to articulate what we are doing here, but we can show people through each of these activities, and each are so different, but they are also connected. So if we can just spark this, interest and curiosity, I'm hoping that that we can create this community where we value each other's work also. One of the things that I would like to mention, there have been so many creative ideas and approaches and thoughts that were shared throughout the summit and the workshops. I would be grateful if everyone, if you are inspired with any of those things, please do give credit to where you get the inspiration from. Just mention in your work, that, I heard this approach from here, and you don't have to have official credits, but that just shows people And all of us encourages, it builds trust, first of all, because we are in the innovative phase here, we are innovating something unique. So, and I know that this is applicable and relevant to so many people who can turn this into, a profit-making thing in their own ways. They can do whatever they want. It's not, I'm not controlling anything, but for me, it is important to have this trust where we value and credit each other's work. And if I am at fault in any way in that regards and recognizing, anybody's contribution, because I hear so many ideas, right? I mean, I'm listening all of this and I put my heart, and it is easy for me to miss, like where I got this particular idea. But if you ever notice something, please point that out to me, that, hey, Elif, like, remember where you got that from? I would be grateful, because that also enriches me and, makes me happy that, like, these connections are working. And if you were, and I'm going to stop talking now, but I don't know how many of you were there on first day. As I mentioned, all the workshops and the summit is recorded with the chats and everything, and will be shared with you, registrants, through a shared folder. And my intention is to make day one public, because it was such a broad, like 30,000 feet view perspective of empathy. And I think it's really could be a useful introduction to our community too. So, please keep that in mind. If you need to share any of the recordings, I would appreciate it if you ask first, so I can ask permissions, like if you, with non-participants, I mean. So within the community, that's fine. There was one workshop which we partially recorded, that was my workshop with Sasha Shireen, that was about her film portraiture, which required personal and private sharing. So that was a listening circle, and so you won't be able to access that portion of it, but I can tell you that it was amazing. We had 4 or 5 people. We had, I think, Reyhane, Sering Norbu from Tibet Museum, Sasha from Russia, and Reyhane, being from Iran originally. I'm from Turkey, but I'm in Arlington, Virginia. We had Greg, and we had one other person who refused to turn his camera on or who contribute. And I acknowledged, his presence, and I welcomed him the way he is, and he just didn't speak. But at the end he said, "I'm sorry, I'm just this way. I just don't feel, comfortable talking a lot," and that's fine too. But these kind of, experiences are, I think, trust building. They enhance community and everything. And if you were there on the first day, when I showed this image, I don't know if anybody remembers the leaf. I was trying to go somewhere with it. I had no idea how it would be received, because it was really like kind of conceptual and a little abstract. But I wanted to make, something quite abstract, more tangible, by bringing an everyday thing, which is in the fold in this hemisphere, at least, that we'll see a lot of them all around us. I would love to know if your perception of the leaf or some of the concepts that were shared throughout the summit helped you individually, or not help is not the right word, but inspired you or provided you with any new ways of looking, or inspiration, or brought up new questions in your mind. And with that, I would like to thank again everyone for their participation. I would like to thank Greg Stevens for his selfless dedication and hard work with like keeping up with all the Zoom check-in calls, and really this was full-time work. I mean, I'm on my annual vacation from my day job so that I could focus on this like whole month. So I took the entire October off. And I'm starting work on Monday, can you? But anyway, that's a different story. But Greg had other commitments also. He teaches. The semester was beginning, so I'm so grateful to Greg for just making his whole self with his big and generous heart and hospitality and loving personality to welcome us all. So grateful, Greg. Thank you so much for doing this again.
It's my pleasure and thank you. And I'm really honored to be a part of this with you. So thank you, Elif.
Thank you, Greg. And with that, please jump in and we can just remove the leaf and we can just look at each other and maybe talk. Any ideas for future, events, how we can do this? What can we do in between? Any commitments that you came up with? Maybe we can start with commitments if you have. You don't have to share them now. You can also share them with survey or later, but please don't forget those because that's our tradition.
Well, Elif, I'll jump in here just very quickly and say that, because I'm sitting here backstage and I'm hearing all of it, I'm struck by how much in alignment what everybody discussed and presented over the last few days, the alignment with your intention, what you intended to have transpire. And by that, I mean people from different sectors, different parts of the world, different disciplines coming together to share different approaches to empathy building. So I truly, I think that took place. I think that what you intended to have happen, happened, at least from my perspective. And I certainly open it up to anyone else who would like to add to that comment.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, Elif, I'm happy to share a commitment. I think these last few days, one of the things that's reinforced for me is the importance of reflection and self-reflection and turning the lens on yourself in order to be capable of engaging in empathy. And so I think so my commitment is to work with our team at the aquarium to create more reflective opportunities for our guests in our community, either on the gallery floor or through experiences or programs. So we had a couple of ideas percolating in our Seattle Aquarium side chat, but that'll be our commitment to create more opportunity for reflection for the Seattle community at the Seattle Aquarium.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Jim.
I don't have a specific commitment at the moment. I mean, I think that we try to, well, we're beginning to think about empathy in our work at the Phillips Collection and think about it more deeply. So I've been grateful for these last 3 days. It's given me a lot to think about and a lot to chew on in terms of how we move forward and how we can do things differently. One of the things that I really appreciate is the fact that in the summit, I was able to explore, and I guess we're all able to explore the idea of empathy from so many different expressions and different institutions and different disciplines. It's just giving me so many perspectives to think about. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. It's really been fantastic.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. And I noticed that Susan posted something that, like she's looking forward to doing this in person, but having this as a virtual event has been also wonderful. We were really able to, so I think we should find a way to keep this community connected because again, traveling is expensive, it requires time and, commitment and resources. We can definitely continue this as a maybe like a mixed format thing where we do things locally or we get together in person for certain collaborative projects that are specific between a few institutions or a few people, but maybe definitely keep this global community involved and expand. Thank you, Susan.
I hope we do maintain the video. This sort of connection as well. But I also want to put another vote into meeting together. I think that when I think about what Stephen shared about the communal empathy experience, and I think about sitting in the spaces that we've sat in, whether it was in India or it was in DC, together, that sense of place had such an impact on me in my empathy journey. I'd love to get back to that too.
Yes, yes, I
Jim,
agree.
you sound like a host in the making.
Maybe.
I agree. I heard a hand. I thought I saw your
The
hand
other
being
Washington.
raised.
There is a great value, though, for a shared experience. And those of us who were fortunate enough to travel abroad with this group way back when, there is a certain bonding of seeing face to face and interactive. And as you had on your list of empathy components, Elif, breaking bread and this kind of thing there's a whole bunch between the lines and but between the substance and the content that's extraordinarily valuable. And I concur with you, Jim, that maybe we should make an effort to find some place where we can have a remarkable experience. It may not be overseas or so distant as at first, and it need not preempt the opportunity of gathering via Zoom, either at that occasion or some occasion around it in a manner. So I concur, and thank you, Jim, for bringing that up.
I can say that from an intention standpoint, at the International League of Conservation Photographers, we very much feel that empathy with the natural world and the cultures and landscape that our fellows document is very important. Elif has heard this. One of our fellows took amazing photographs, but another photographer was doing a portfolio review of his work and said, there's not an ounce of empathy in your work. You take very beautiful photographs, but I feel nothing when I see your work. And it changed the entire direction of that photographer's career. And he, now he speaks about this all over the world, about how important empathy is to him, documenting nature, working with different cultures, and also with the landscape. So I want our organization to do even more on this and find new ways that empathy can enter into our work.
Thank you, Susan.
I'll jump in. I'm committed to working on building a more empathic culture and society. And those animals you were talking about, Elif, at the beginning, I'm committed to bring them into an empathy circle, get that lion and the animals to sit down with each other and have a mutual dialogue, empathic dialogue with each other, and try to understand each other's experience and perspective. And in terms of another event, how about we have some empathy tents that we take out and set up in different public spaces and offer listening to people. How about we take those, set them up in front of the White House or the Congress, and hold our conference there and invite the politicians into dialogue, into empathy circles.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Edwin, for sharing that. And Edwin, I don't know, I'm sure, Edwin, I hope you put your website in the chat, and you have a workshop tomorrow. But Edwin is one of the first people who ever created this extensive online empathy library. Whoever has written or has done anything about empathy has sometime spoke with Edwin, and he recorded him or her or they, and then it is in his library. So it is really interesting to just take a look at what he's doing. And his listening circles are also quite effective and could also be used in group settings, in corporations, in organizations, and maybe we can find ways to support Edwin's work through this way. Maybe if we have any budget for a team building activity, it could be Jaago or Edwin's listening circles, or so we can look in this community, or Andrew's tap dancing workshop. He can maybe create a something unique and original, and I'm missing a whole bunch of other people I know, but you get my point that, there's so many resources here, but it is important to recognize that, this work requires commitment and resources. And it is important, one way of valuing each other's work is to also try to find funding for these people to continue to do the work that they are doing. So I would especially, just mention this to the leaders of institutions that, I think it would be a really good way to support these efforts is to incorporate them into their, day-to-day organizational goals, if possible at all. It could be equity, diversity, team building, professional development, listening, collaboration, I can go on. But this is a possibility. And this is one of the ways that we can scale these workshops. I mean, workshops is an experimental place. So we are learning, but some of them like Jaago and Andrew, I mean, they teach this, right? They have done this, and Edwin too, right? He has been doing this, they have been doing this for many years. So they have a structured format, which could be quite relevant to some organizational goals.
I'd be happy to go real quick.
Yes, Michelle, please.
Yeah, no, so I think, for me, one of my big intentions for this next year is to work with you on helping to create that statement of like explaining what we are trying to do to people who are unfamiliar with it, or who might not understand, because I really do want to communicate out to larger groups and different audiences what it is we're all passionate about, and what it is, where we want that to go. So whether it's my own corporation that I work for, others that I'm associated with, or, friends and colleagues and associates that are in, not just in museums, but in a lot of other areas, because I do feel that it has so much relevance and value way beyond just museums, libraries, aquariums, and where it has come from. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for sharing.
I'll share. Three things that I'll pretend are one. One is simply to go back and for what to commit to. I definitely want to go back and rewatch a lot of this, and particularly some of the workshops that I missed. I really enjoyed I guess I've been, 3 meetings now, and the changes in certain themes, or the developments of certain themes, are really exciting to me, particularly, frankly, the thing that's related to my second commitment, which is to hold back from most commitments, because I'm really trying to reevaluate. I'm really trying to make sure I'm doing the self-empathy part enough, and choosing, therefore, wisely what thing to then focus in on next, because I've found that it was Will, I think, another way of describing what she described was associative. I'm so associative that I want to do all these different things. And I'm learning that I was very happy at this meeting, because I didn't get all hyper with every single thing I watched, which is my usual mode. And I was really happy about that, because it's like, oh, great, calm, that's part of self-empathy. And then the third thing simply is, Elif, to connect with you again very soon and figure out in what way our conversations, or whatever it is I can offer. That is one thing that's an ongoing thing I'm willing to commit to, is continuing to help your amazing sparked thinking, or wherever it is that we do. And likewise, I'd love to meet up with some people in DC, since I'm vaguely in the DC area. Thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'll share. Well, I think first, just super grateful to be invited into this space. I feel like I've learned so much in the past 3 days hearing from all of you, but also recognizing that it's such a privilege to be in this space. So my intention is trying to figure out how I share these insights, these questions, these learnings with my colleagues, my friends, my students, the people who don't have the privilege of being in these conversations among these amazing practitioners and professionals. So thinking about how do we democratize these learnings so that our individual action can move towards collective action. So lots of intention and thought around that, and thank you all for contributing to that.
That's wonderful. That's definitely an aspiration that I have too. And thank you for sharing that, AR. I mean, so I don't know if you are familiar or with the evolution of this group that became One. It is, I just started this LLC. We started on the journey to become a nonprofit in the last summit. But literally karma did not allow it. I mean, our application got lost in legal Zoom, and after like 6 or 8 months later, we were waiting what happened. Our life situations have changed, our commitments, and it requires considerable time commitment and other types of commitment to run a nonprofit, and with multiple people involved. And so we decided that like I should just go ahead and keep doing what I'm doing. Which brings me to the point, I established One, and I'm the only one working in this, literally. I mean, I'm not, of course, I'm grateful for all the support, but when it comes to doing the work, it is really me. And I was really like hurting when I thought, when I first, okay, like we are gonna do this. But there has to be some commitment to people who present, like in terms of at least a symbolic honorarium, and that's what prompted me actually. Then okay, now I have to learn how to fundraise, write a fundraising request letter and like collect all the like data, and I mean like all those in institutions you have, as you know, they have people and teams that work on each of these aspects. And then create a website and figure out the ticketing issue and everything, it really hurt me to charge, having to charge for this event. I think this event should be free, but with some way of making sure that people who register show up, because and also for safety reasons, safety and privacy and intellectual property reasons, because the kinds of people who are in our community are like they have some connection to higher education, and they're aware of the innovation, the aspects of innovation and creative ideas, and so we are able to share them freely. But you can't be sure on everybody's, so we need to have a safe space for ourselves to be able to continue to do this while also being inclusive. So if anybody has any ideas about how to achieve that and literally democratize it by making it at least available for those who can, but then also find other ways to share it, but availability, I think one way of making it democratizing this is to be able to make it available to everyone free. So yeah, that's definitely something that I'm still learning. And if anybody has any ideas in terms of maybe finding, maybe an institutional partner where, maybe we can apply for a grant, so we don't have to go for, sponsorship or individual support and, asking presenters of friends, like, hey, can you really register if your institution is paying for this? I need to pay, some other presenters, and, those institutions who have the funding have registered, but normally they would have received, complimentary access naturally, because they have been a part of this community. So it was a lot of juggling, which made me, uncomfortable, but like I was in it already. So, so if there's a way that you can help me do better next time, I'd be grateful.
I would add here, Elif, and for others, now that I've been a part of this program for 2 years, My intention for the coming year would be to more intentionally and explicitly integrate some of these empathy themes into my curriculum at Seton Hall, where I direct the graduate program in museum professions. And I know a couple of my students are here in our audience right now. And I've woven it in some ways, but now I'm thinking that I really need to be more thoughtful and intentional about it, so that it's not just a side note or a footnote, if you will, to broader conversations about the ever-shifting paradigm of museums. Well, this fits into that. Or our focus on social justice issues in museums. This clearly fits into that. Foundations of education and visitor experience. This absolutely fits into that. So it's just making me think to be more intentional and thoughtful about integrating empathy themes.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for sharing. And thank you to your students who are here. Maybe we can have a debriefing after the summit, and I would love to hear their reflections. And with that, if anybody else would like to share, and we can always keep in touch. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I bet you will have another Zoom meeting in the next 5 minutes after this. I wouldn't be surprised. So, but I hope you also can get some rest. Thank you so much. I'm grateful. So we are in our 4th year. Yay! And in 5th year, God knows where we will be. We could be in India again, maybe, or in Turkey, or in Greece. Who knows? Or somewhere in the US, but always with we need to find a way to keep the global community. There's so much interest. The amount of interest that I got from students and people from all walks of life about how can we participate, and I keep sending them links, and some I guess got it, some didn't, and so it was. It's a learning experience, but so any ideas you might have, I would be grateful to hear. Thank you all again for being here, and I'll stop talking. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Tomorrow there's a workshop by Edwin, there's listening circles, and on November 2nd we have Lidaway and Catherine doing the climate change, unfolding, what was it? Using imaginative empathy to unpack climate change. So really looking forward to that. And let's keep generating those ideas for future workshops and collaborations. And until next summit.
Thanks, Elif. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks.